In the month of May 2024, a prolific member of the Umbris, the Sorcerer, set forth the grounds for what would later become Project Yugoth. Yuggoth was set to be a realm server where each individual player had the right and the responsibility of establishing a sovereign form of state simply known as Empire. All throughout the infinite extension of Yuggoth, each player/emperor would have to found, grow, manage, defend, build, and represent an independent empire of which the land was chosen freely by the players. The events in Yuggoth unfolded through the actions of 8 different monarchs. Throughout several months and more than 100 pages of written lore, 4 empires were officially founded, named, and brought forth as valid institutions under the council known later as the Assembly of the Four Crowns. This is their story. Many massive monuments will be seen in the background of some of these empires. However, if they are not shown, it is because they are not built by the empires themselves. These dungeons are artificially made by an add-on of dungeons in the Realms server. Because these are not structures made and created by the empires and the emperors themselves, they will not be shown. The 7 Pilgrims. The arrival of the first 7 pilgrims to Yuggoth was an event that marked the beginning of a new era, a moment that would resonate through the annals of history as the start of a vast and dark web of power and ambition. Throughout the icy mountains of Akara, the most imposing and treacherous in all of Yuggoth, the 7 arrived. The Seer, the Warlock, the Spectre, the Confessor, the Sorcerer, the Robot, and the Sun. The 7 were more than mere pilgrims. Each represented a facet of power and ambition from their native lands. The Seer, with his ability to foresee uncertain futures, was linked to the oldest traditions of prophecy. The Warlock, who had mastered the arcane long before Yuggoth was even conceived among the stars, walked at the forefront, not by decree, but because the other 6 recognized in him an ancient and unyielding presence. The Spectre, whose face was never visible, carried the weight of the undead, a constant threat to those who did not understand the rules governing existence beyond life. The Confessor was an enigma, a man of faith among the dark gods, guarding the most abominable secrets of his cult. The Sorcerer, rival to the Warlock yet equally powerful, commanded the elemental mysteries capable of bending nature itself. The Sorcerer was also the only living herald of the god creator of Yuggoth, Primus. The Robot, a cold and calculating creation, represented a civilization where humanity had yielded to the perfection of machines. And finally, the Sun, whose power radiated not only heat but judgment, capable of consuming or revitalizing with a single flare. The 7 were received in Yuggoth by the Herald of Primus, the guardian of the world and master of fate, who was in turn the Sorcerer, in his most sublime form. The Herald had spent eons waving the threads that would unite Yuggoth's disparate civilizations. His power resided in the arcane, in the unthinkable, and he had shaped the destiny of this world to his will. The Pilgrims' Sanctuary, his masterpiece, was erected in the depths of the icy Akara Mountains, a resplendent town marked by the majesty that defied even the skies. The sanctuary was not just a city or a town, it was the center of everything, a beacon of hope for some and a gilded prison for others. At its heart stood the Congress of the Union, a titanic structure housing the 4 banners of the sovereign empires. These banners were not mere symbols, but living relics, pulsating with an ancestral energy that connected directly to the souls traversing the world of Yuggoth. Beneath these banners lay the chests of creations, each containing 2 villager eggs, symbols of the future of each civilization. The destiny of every people, their growth, their rise or fall, would depend on those who emerged from these eggs. Beside it all stood the Judicial House, a fortress of power where the Warlock decreed it that all legal orders would be carried out through parliamentary means. However, those who knew the darkest secrets of Yuggoth understood that justice was not blind. The courts were steeped in corruption, in invisible manipulations that transcended morality and intertwined with the threats of political power. Every trial, every verdict was in reality a calculated move on an invisible chessboard, where the pieces were lives, empires, and the very essence of Yuggoth. The Sorcerer had placed the first nether portal near the foothills of the Akara Mountains bordering the town. The portal was a gateway to immeasurable power, a link to the underworld that promised more than anyone could imagine. But the portal was also a reminder of the lurking threats of the chaotic forces that once devastated the ancient kingdoms. Though the sanctuary was filled with life, with monuments glorifying past triumph and crops that nourished the population, beneath the surface, intrigues were brewing. The alliances forged were as fragile as leaves beneath the northern wind. The arrival of the Seven marked the beginning of a long chess game where every move was carefully observed by the others. The Sorcerer, as the master of the board, watched everything from his arcane psyche, aware that although he had created the rules, he could not predict every move of the players. And so, beneath the frozen mountains of Akara, the game of power began. One that would not end until the last of the Seven fell or conquered all. The Band of the Hawk. The Band of the Hawk was the first empire to emerge in the vast and desolate world of Yugoth, an empire that would sow the seeds of conflict that would resonate for generations. Founded by the enigmatic and powerful emperors, the Sorcerer and the Seer, the Band of the Hawk not only represented the beginnings of a new civilization, but also the birth of an intricate web of intrigues, ambitions, and betrayals. In the dawn of Yuggoth, when the cold wind was still the only thing cutting through the ice deserts, and the mountains stood as witnesses of forgotten times, the Sorcerer and the Seer joined forces to create what many would see as the mother civilization. The Sorcerer, master of arcane arts, had wandered the desolate lands searching for a place where his vast knowledge could take root. The Seer, on the other hand, saw beyond possibilities, beyond time itself, and knew that if a lasting dynasty were to be founded, the first step had to be taken in a hidden and remote place. The Band of the Hawk began as no more than a small hut surrounded by humble crops, a modest settlement for an empire that would change the course of history. The two emperors, though powerful, maintained a philosophy of prudence. They knew that in the early days of Yugoth, power was not measured by the ostentation of a city, but by discretion and planning. In their solitude, far from the eyes of others, they began to weave the threads of their empire. The anonymity of the Band of the Hawk would not last forever. The vast lands of Yuggoth, still undiscovered, were full of inquisitive eyes, and it was not long before the existence of the Band of the Hawk was uncovered. It was the son, co-emperor of the unnamed Third Empire of the Assembly of the Four Crowns, who first stumbled upon the lands of the Seer and the Sorcerer. By his side was the robot, his imperial companion, and one of the most calculating and cold minds of the New World. The discovery of the Band of the Hawk altered the balance of power that had begun to form in Yuggoth. The son, always seeking to extend his light and influence, saw the modest settlement of the Band of the Hawk as an opportunity to establish contact with what he then considered a small faction. However, his arrival was not well received with the passivity he expected. The Seer, having foreseen the arrival of this powerful emperor, knew that his small empire was not prepared to openly confront the third, currently unnamed empire. The Sorcerer, ever calculating, also understood that the forces of Yuggoth were too nascent to afford a direct conflict. The emperors of the Band of the Hawk, aware of the danger posed by the son's interest, made a bold decision. They would not allow themselves to be subjected to the rapid discovery of their lands, nor to the cold logic of the robot. Thus, they planned a strategic retreat. The Seer, with his ability to see beyond immediate events, knew that his empire would only thrive if it remained hidden for a time. The Sorcerer, master of the occult arts, wove a powerful spell that shrouded the Band of the Hawk in a veil of mystery, erasing its existence from the memories and gazes of those who tried to find it. The Band of the Hawk then migrated to distant lands beyond the mountains that marked the boundaries of the known world in Yuggoth. The new settlement would be a hidden birch forest, its location kept secret even from the most powerful of the sovereign empires. In this new refuge, the Band of the Hawk would thrive in the shadows, observing the movements of the other empires while keeping their powers on the sidelines of the growing conflict. The new location of the Band of the Hawk became one of the best best-kept secrets of Yuggoth. While the other empires competed for lands and resources, the Band of the Hawk worked in silence. Their crops multiplied, and under the watchful eyes of the Sorcerer and the Seer, secret alliances were formed with the darkest and most arcane forces of Yuggoth. The geographical distance from the other empires allowed them to observe without being seen, and their spies, scattered throughout Yuggoth, gathered vital information that would enable them to intervene at the right moment. The voluntary exile of the Band of the Hawk was not without consequences. Many within the empire questioned the decision to move far away from the centers of power. Some nobles even murmured that the emperors had condemned them to oblivion. Others, more faithful, believed that the Seer's plan was merely a long-term strategy, and that when the time came, the Band of the Hawk would return with an unstoppable force. The Empire of the Robot and the Head of a God. The Empire of the Robot was one of the first empires to rise in the strange lands of Yuggoth, a world forged in cold and darkness, where the ambition of those who arrived first would shape the destiny of all its inhabitants. While the Band of the Hawk was founding Falconia in the shadows, the Third Empire, never named, was silently emerging under the calculating and ruthless vision of its leader, the Robot. Although the empire shared power with his co-emperor, the Sun, it was the Robot who took the reins of its construction in the early stages, weaving a realm of logic and progress on the edges of the dying body of an ancient god. There was no romanticism or mysticism in the foundation of the Third Empire. While the other leaders of Yuggoth viewed power through magic, prophecy, and shadows, the Robot saw only the future in mechanical control and mastery over matter. In the mountainous lands of the cherry blossom forests, northwest of the sanctuary of the Pilgrims, the Robot discovered the remnants of a fallen ancient god, a titanic figure whose corpse had been fused with the land for centuries. Its head, still intact, rested among the mountains, surrounded by a mist that seemed to vibrate with a forgotten energy. The presence of the divine corpse did not inspire fear or reverence in the Robot, but rather fascination and opportunity. The remains of the god were a symbol of the past, a reminder that even the most powerful beings fall, and if a god could be reduced to dust, then the kings and emperors of Yuggoth were nothing more than pieces on the grand board of the Robot's game. The body of the god would not only serve as a hidden sanctuary for his empire, but also a source of resources and power that the Robot knew had yet to be fully exploited. Without the aid of his co-emperor, the Sun, who was preoccupied with other endeavors, the Robot began constructing the empire. There were no luxuries or initial monuments to honor its foundation. Instead, the Robot's refuge was a functional structure, a cold citadel of wood and stone, with farms and stables that sustained only what was essential for survival. Beauty was irrelevant, efficiency was paramount. The Third Empire was the first to begin exploiting Yuggoth's underground resources. Under the Robot's orders, a vast system of mines were carved beneath the surface of its mountains. These mines did not only extract minerals and precious stones, but also fragments of the ancient god, whose fossilized bones and tissues held properties that the Robot planned to study and utilize. Some claimed that the remains of the god contained a primordial energy, a vital force that could be harnessed. Others whispered that deep within the mines, whispers could be heard, echoes of the god's soul trying to reawaken. As the mines expanded, the Robot began constructing the Empire's first military force, a pack of hounds, beasts trained to obey and defend with the precision of a machine. The army was not large in number, but its precision and lethality compensated for any disadvantage. The dogs were merely the first phase of a greater plan to secure the Empire's hegemony over Yuggoth, a plan that only the Robot fully understood. His co-emperor, the Sun, upon learning of the Robot's progress, showed little interest in his cold and calculated tactics. While the Robot obsessed over construction and underground expansion, the Sun gazed at the sky, seeking ways to dominate the surface and establish his power through brilliance and light. From the beginning, the relationship between the two emperors was tense and distant. The Sun saw in the Robot's efficiency a threat to his desire to control Yuggoth in a more visible, more divine manner. Meanwhile, the Robot considered the Sun an arrogant and unpredictable figure whose focus on symbolism and grandeur interfered with the cold logic of imperial expansion. The corpse of the ancient god, resting in the mountains of the northwest, quickly became a focal point of mystery and speculation. Though the robot had begun fully extracting what he needed from the remains, rumors about its true nature spread among the inhabitants of the empire and beyond. Was the god truly a fallen being, a forgotten deity that once ruled over Yuggoth? Or was it something darker, an entity whose existence defiled mortal comprehension? The oldest inhabitants of Yuggoth spoke of a celestial war that took place before the arrival of the first empires, in which gods clashed against each other, and one was defeated, its body crashing to the earth, condemned to eternity beneath the eyes. Though these stories had no tangible evidence, their echoes lingered in the minds of those who passed near the remains. The miners swore that at times they could hear a distant heartbeat, a monotonous rhythmic sound emanating from the depths of the corpse. The robot, of course, did not believe in such superstitions. To him, the god's corpse was merely a source of material, an inert resource to be exploited for the glory of the empire. However, he began conducting experiments on the pieces he had extracted from the body, seeking ways to merge the ancient divine energy with his technology. Some speculated that the robot planned to reanimate the god in the form of a machine, an unstoppable force that would only obey his command. The Eternal Flint. Although erased from the annals of history, the first Eternal Flint was the first attempt at dominion of the wild and chaotic lands of Yuggoth. Founded long before the famous Band of the Hawk, its origins are shrouded in mystery, betrayal, and apocalyptic visions that would shape not only the fate of men, but also the balance of the world itself. The birth of this empire, west of the sanctuary of the Pilgrims, by the banks of a dark and sluggish river, was initially a declaration of sovereignty over an untamable land. However, the glory that once reached the skies with a 200-meter pillar of stone quickly faded, buried in the sands of time and abandonment. In the early days, before the shadows of chaos and war engulfed Yuggoth, the Warlock, one of the most enigmatic and powerful beings in the world, decided to establish a kingdom that would endure beyond the ages. With his ancestral wisdom, he erected a vast stone pillar by the western river of the sanctuary, a monumental structure symbolizing the strength and eternity of his reign. This monolith, called the Eternal Flint, was more than just a construction. It was said to be imbued with ancient magic, capable of withstanding the passage of time and any attempt at destruction. It was a beacon of power, a promise that the empire rising around it would never fall. But as is often the case in the shadowed lands of Yuggoth, the fate of the first Eternal Flint was far more complex. Its initial splendor would not last. The people who had come to inhabit its surroundings vanished. The great pillar was left desolate, and the first settlements that had grown in its shadow turned into ghost towns. The reason for its abandonment was a secret known only to a few. The Warlock, the architect of the Eternal Flint, was the first to desert it. One day, without warning, he left his creation and disappeared into the horizon. Rumors spread swiftly among the inhabitants of Yuggoth. Some said the Warlock had lost his sanity after seeing something in the river's waters, something so terrifying that it forced him to flee. Others whispered that he had been visited by the spirits of the past, who warned him of an imminent betrayal within his own court. The truth, however, was much darker and deeper. While the sorcerer wandered near the river, he encountered a stranger, a monarch who walked alone. This mysterious ruler, whose lands were unknown and whose name was lost to the echoes of history, spoke to him in the whispers of a vision that would change his life forever. Amid the mist that covered the river, the monarch spoke of an inevitable war, a war that would destroy everything the Warlock had sought to build. But beyond destruction, he also spoke of a mystical place, an island lost in the sea, where the true Eternal Flint could be found. The monarch described the island as a sacred rock, a solitary crag rising in the middle of the sea, battered by storms and surrounded by unimaginable perils. There, deep within the earth, lay hidden the power the Warlock had only attempted to emulate with his stone pillar. The monarch claimed to have seen the true flint in his dreams, an artifact of immense power, capable of altering the course of history and shielding its wielder from the chaos soon to engulf Yuggoth. Convinced that his original vision had been a mistake, the Warlock made a pact with the monarch. Together they began preparations to abandon the Eternal Flint and journey towards the ocean in search of the sacred crag. They knew that to maintain control over their destiny, they had to erase all evidence of the first attempt at an empire. Thus, they decided to remove all records of the first Eternal Flint from Yuggoth's Yugoth's historical codices, as if it had never existed. Their departure was swift and silent. With only a few loyal followers, both leaders set out toward the dark waters of the west. The empire that had begun to take shape around the pillar was abandoned. Its lands left to the elements, and its people without leaders to guide them soon scattered. The Eternal Flint became a forgotten myth, a story whispered amongst the oldest, but only few believed to be real. After months of travel facing stormy seas and creatures that defied imagination, the Sorcerer and the mysterious monarch finally found the island. It was exactly as the monarch had described, a solitary rock in the middle of an endless sea, battered by wind and waves. In the island's deepest caves, surrounded by an aura of ancient power, lay the true Flint, an artifact of unimaginable proportions, its energy pulsing with the very heartbeat of the earth. The Warlock, upon feeling its power, understood that the monarch had not lied. The pillar he had built by the river was nothing more than a crude imitation of what lay on this island. The true Eternal Flint was not just a source of power, but a symbol of ultimate sovereignty. An artifact that could change the course of Yugoth's history if wielded correctly. Both knew that with this new power they could build an empire that would transcend the ages, one that would not be forgotten like the last. They began laying the foundations of the new Eternal Flint on that lost island, far from the eyes of the world. This time their empire would not be visible or accessible to just anyone. It would be an empire of shadows, ruled from afar, manipulating Yugoth's fate while its true lords hid in the safety of the sacred crack. The codices that once recorded the history of the old Eternal Flint were either destroyed or altered. The few who still remember the existence of the pillar by the river dared not to speak of it, fearing the Warlock's dark magic would find them. And so the first attempt at an empire was erased from history, while the true Eternal Flint and its distant island grew stronger in the shadows. But Yuggoth is a place where stories never remain buried for long, and those who had witnessed the rise of the Eternal Flint and its mysterious disappearance began to whisper once more. Visions of an impending war grew clearer, and rumors of a hidden power in the ocean spread amongst scholars and adventurers alike. The Sorcerer and the mysterious monarch waited patiently. They knew that when the right moment arrived, the true Flint would reveal its full power, and the empire would rise upon the ruins of all others. The shadows stirred in Yuggoth, and the fate of the world hung by a thread. The Clan of the Dark Skulls. The Clan of the Dark Skulls is one of the most enigmatic and sinister factions in the annals of Yuggoth's history. Its origins are intertwined with the mysteries of the north and the shadows of the mountains. In the north, beyond the great frozen peaks of Akara, stretched green forests that abruptly ended at a narrow river, whose opposite shore gave way to a vast natural stone plain at the foot of a magnificent mountain. Two key figures in Yuggoth's history, the Spectre and the Confessor, found in this vast land the foundations of their empire. This tale, like many in the dawn of the world, is marked by ambition, betrayal, and blood, traits that would define the fate of the clan in the events that followed. The exact moment when the Spectre and the Confessor arrived in the northern lands is unknown. However, their rapid ascent to power is undeniable. Flanked by the imposing mountains that separated the new territory from the domain of the robot, another rising lord, the two emperors established what would later be known as the territory of the Clan of the Dark Skulls. The relationship was cold and functional, more of an alliance of convenience than one of friendship, marked by pragmatism and the need for protection in a world that grew increasingly hostile and competitive. The Spectre, a solitary shadowy figure, worked tirelessly to raise an empire from nothing. He was one of the few lords who built his domain almost entirely on his own, piece by piece with his own hands, without relying on vassals or architects. Every stone block, every tower, every wall of his castle was placed under his strict direction, making his kingdom an extension of his own will in his aspect. He was similar to the Warlock and the Robot in that respect, are the great solitary architects of Yuggoth. The three shared an understanding that true power had to be built on stone and blood, not on words or temporary alliances. However, things took a dark turn in the sudden disappearance of the Confessor. Without explanation or trace, his co-emperor vanished, leaving the Spectre alone in the vast enterprise of ruling. Many whispered that he had been assassinated, others that he had deserted in the search for power beyond the mortal realm. But his absence did not weaken the Spectre. On the contrary, his kingdom continued to expand, and the dominion of the Dark Skulls thrived without interruption. It was during these early decades of expansion and shortly before the Confessor's disappearance that the fates of two empires became unexpectedly intertwined. Beneath the mountains that marked the borders of the Spectres and the Robots' territories, both empires made a monumental discovery: the ancient cities. A vast underground metropolis containing remnants of a civilization far older and more advanced than anything seen in Yuggoth. These places were filled with unimaginable treasures, but also concealed a lethal danger. The riches extracted from those depths drastically shifted the balance of power in Yuggoth. Emeralds, magical artifacts, and resources of incalculable value flowed in both empires, giving them an economic and military advantage over their contemporaries. But the plundering came with dire consequences. The emperor's ambition awakened something that had long slumbered in the depths of the ancient cities: the Wardens, known in the dark codices as Gerden Guarvar. These creatures, ancient guardians of the underground city, were more than mere opponents. They were ancestral horrors, beings from ages before the arrival of mortals to Yuggoth. Their awakening marked the beginning of a war that would be remembered as the First and Second Catastrophe, events that would define the course of the early empires. During these catastrophes, the mountains themselves trembled to screams and clashes of battle. The Spectre, the Robot, the Sun, and the Confessor died time and time again, sacrificing themselves in an infernal combat against the Wardens. The surroundings were stained red and the stench of death permeated the air. Each emperor sacrificed their flesh and bone hundreds of times over and over again to halt the advance of these beings, failing, falling, and rising again in an endless cycle of horror and blood. The battles were not merely physical confrontations, but also spiritual and mental warfare. The emperors faced the terrifying possibility of losing their souls, trapped forever in the shadows of the ancient cities. However, after unimaginable suffering, both empires achieved the unthinkable. They defeated the Wardens and claimed the cities for themselves. The victories in the First and Second Catastrophe positioned the Spectres and the Robots as empires as the most powerful in Yuggoth. The looted ancient cities provided the necessary resources to multiply their wealth, while the empires forged trade agreements and strategic alliances. The then unnamed empires of the Eternal Flint and the Clan of the Dark Skulls were the two empires first to lay the foundations of what would later become a mercantile and functional society, with castles, towers, and thriving lands under their control. They were the first to claim and utilize their respective creation chests, with which they began to expand their citizenry. The emerald, a symbol of power and wealth in Yuggoth, began to flow in abundance. Merchants from all corners of the world traveled to negotiate with the Spectre and the Warlock, creating a web of influence that extended beyond the mountains. Trade became the key to their power, as both empires maximized their commercial capacities, securing their dominance not only through strength, but also through economic control. Amidst this growing prosperity, the Spectre and the Warlock saw the need to unify their forces in the face of rising tensions in Yuggoth. Both understood that despite the Robot and the Spectre's victories and the catastrophes, peace was never guaranteed in a world where power and ambition dictated everything. It was then that in a clandestine meeting in the mountain shadows, they discussed the terms of what would later be known as the First Imperial Alliance. The pact between these two emperors had a clear goal: to prevent future wars through military unity and cooperation. They knew that fragmented empires were vulnerable to external threats and internal betrayals. With this pact, they established a common front, an agreement that made war less viable option for all resolving disputes. With the signing of this alliance, a step was taken towards consolidating power in Yuggoth. Although peace was fragile and tensions persisted, the empires began working together, solidifying their dominance over the continent. However, the alliance was not without shadows and betrayals, and many in Yuggoth wondered how long it would last before ambition once again unleashed the wars that had once ravaged the world. Thus, the Clan of the Dark Skulls, along with its allies, marked the beginning of a new era, one where power was no longer defined solely by the strength of arms, but also by the ability to manipulate trade, alliances, and resources in a world in constant flux. the Second Imperial Alliance and the unified military front. The balance of power in Yuggoth was fragile, and the threads connecting the great empires grew taut with every step in their expansion and consolidation. Two empires, which at the time had yet to etch their names indelibly into the codices of history, had begun to take shape with a speed that astonished even the most seasoned veterans of Yuggoth. The Eternal Flint, and what would later be known as the Clan of the Dark Skulls, guided by the solitary genius of the Spectre and the magical prowesses of the Warlock, thrived amidst a network of trade and political pacts. These empires, though distinct in nature, found a common rhythm in their growth. The Eternal Flint, with its imposing and mystical character, and the Dark Skulls, with their skill in building in the shadows and expanding their architectural domains with beautiful towers, castles, and villages, both quickly emerged as economic and military powers. However, in the shadow of their expansions, the empires suffered losses that echoed through Yuggoth's halls of power. The still unnamed Empire of the Robot was amongst the most affected by the tragedy and mystery. While the Warlocks and the Spectres' empires flourished, the Robots suffered a series of unsettling disappearances that left his realm in uncertainty. The Sun, his co-emperor and one of the most enigmatic figures of the Third Empire, vanished without a trace. Along with him, the Confessor, co-regent of the Clan of the Dark Skulls, and a third monarch not yet named in the codices but linked to the Eternal Flint, all disappeared under dark and unexplained circumstances. These losses left the Robot alone in the task of raising his empire, as well as the Spectre and the Warlock. However, they did not succumb to loneliness or tragedy. In his isolation, the Robot dedicated himself to construction, erecting with his own hands the walls and structure that would consolidate his empire. The most enigmatic of his projects was one that he chose to build around the remains of an ancient god, whose fossilized head had been discovered deep within the mountains that marked his territory. The monumental project of enclosing the god's head within an impenetrable wall sparked rumors all throughout Yuggoth. Peasants and merchants whispered that not only a head rested beneath the earth, but the body of the entire buried god. Stories even spread of a buried hand in a remote part of the empire connected to the deity. However, the most disturbing event occurred when, as the wall around the skull was being completed, the head began to weep drops of lava. The phenomenon, considered an ill omen by some and a sign of power by others, marked the moment when the Robots' empire solidified as a feared force on the continent. Amidst expansion, rumors, and tragedies, a mysterious letter arrived in the Robots' hand. An invitation from the Union Congress in the Sanctuary. A summon to the table of the highest of decisions. There, the Warlock sought to meet with his fellow emperor to discuss the terms of a pact that could alter the course of power in Yuggoth forever. The issue at hand was the strategy of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, a military doctrine designed to deter nations from total war. Under this agreement, it was recognized that any open conflict between the great empires would result in the annihilation of all. Each empire's capacity to inflict destruction on its rivals was such that only rational option was to avoid war altogether. Thus, absolute destruction became the guarantor of peace. At the Congress, tensions were palpable. Despite emerging alliances, Yuggoth's recent history was riddled with betrayals and unbridled ambitions. However, during the discussions, a new and dark chapter came to light. The Warlock, in a moment that surprised the Robot, revealed the last known plans of his co-emperor, the mysterious monarch who had disappeared alongside the Sun and the Confessor. Before his disappearance, this monarch had conceived a plan that, had it succeeded, would have placed all empires under his absolute control. The Warlock confessed that his co-emperor had devised a scheme to control the Elytras, an artifact of unimaginable power that guaranteed the ability to fly. His plan was to monopolize this power, subjugate all other empires, and establish a ruthless dictatorship. Had he achieved his goal, no empire could have challenged his dominion over the skies. The revelation of this plan shook the table of emperors. In a world where wars were waged for land, the power to control the skies would have been devastating. Faced with this threat, the empires realized that they had to unite beyond trade agreement and temporary alliances. MAD was not just a deterrence strategy, it was a pact of survival. As a result of this revelation, the unified military front was formed, an unprecedented military alliance in Yuggoth's history. The empires of the Robot, the Spectre, and the Warlock agreed to work together to prevent any tyrant from attempting to monopolize the power of the Elytras or any similar artifact. War, though not eliminated as a possibility, instability became a last resort, an option so dangerous that no rational leader would dare to undertake it. The unified military front, just like the mutually assured destruction plan, laid the foundations for what would later become the Assembly of the Four Crowns, a council of Yuggoth's most powerful empires that would oversee the continent's peace and stability. However, underlying tensions between the empires, historical rivalries, and personal ambitions remained a latent threat. Peace, though established for the moment, was not guaranteed. The mysterious disappearance of the Sun, the Confessor, and the co-emperor of the Eternal Flint left a power vacuum that some sought to fill, while others preferred to ignore. Whispers spread that these monarchs had not died, but had found something beyond Yuggoth's confines, something that had called them to a destiny known only to them. Others, more pragmatic, suggested that they had been eliminated by internal enemies, perhaps by their own allies, fearful of their ambitions. The legacy of these emperors, though marked by their absence, would endure in the pacts that they forged and the empires they helped consolidate. Meanwhile, the robot, now more isolated than ever, continued his work, enclosing the remains of the ancient god and preparing his empire for what he knew would eventually come. A conflict in which, regardless of alliances and pacts, only the strongest and most cunning would survive. The letter and the monuments of discord. The icy northern wind swept violently across the vast unexplored lands of Yuggoth, where the shadows of rising empires stretched further each day. Among them, the Spectre, an emperor who had risen to power in solitude, left behind something that would stir both leaders and the humblest pilgrims alike. At the edge of the sanctuary, in a secluded corner where monuments erected by history and pain stood as silent witnesses, a letter was found, carefully pinned to a smooth, dark stone. It was not a missive of war, nor an imperial edict. It was a communique, a memorial, intended for someone whose days on Earth had ended beneath the harshness of winter. The letter, written in austere yet firm handwriting, read, "Dear Explorer, I am deeply sorry that you had to spend your last days enduring the bone-chilling winter cold. I cannot begin to imagine the pain and sorrow you must have felt before exhaling your last breath. I promise to give you a proper burial so that you may find eternal rest. I shall take care of Axi." A signature was unnecessary. Those who knew the Spectre understood that these words could have only come from him. He was known for his reluctance towards public relations, for his deeds in the shadows, and for his solitary decisions, but also for his deep sense of duty towards those he considered under his protection. This letter, addressed to an unknown explorer, resonated with the tragedy of those who had given their lives in the pursuit of the unattainable in Yuggoth. Many believed that the Spectre was referring to one of the many pilgrims who, in hope of finding the mystical treasures of the Monuments of Discord, had perished in the frozen northern desert. The Monuments of Discord were legendary structures built in ancient times during the dawn of the world, when the Sorcerer, one of the first 7 to arrive in Yuggoth, summoned the world's creator, the enigmatic Primus. In that primordial ritual, the Sorcerer scattered sacred eggs across the entire planet, placing them within the monoliths and stone columns that made up the monuments. Each egg contained a creature or being whose power was believed to be capable of altering the fate of entire civilizations. Hundreds of explorers and pilgrims had dedicated their lives to finding these eggs in a desperate attempt to access the secrets and promises they held. Some sought glory, others power, and a few answers to the enigmas of creation. For most, this quest ended in tragedy, whether due to the deadly dangers of the terrain, the harshness of the climate, or the madness these monuments inflicted upon the desperate minds of seekers. The story told by the Spectre in his letter was no different from many others, but what disturbed the scholars and sages was the mention of Axi. It was an unknown name in the official codices of Yuggoth, and rumors quickly spread. Some said Axi was a travel companion of the fallen explorer, perhaps another unfortunate soul lost in the search of the eggs. Others suggested that Axi could be a creature linked to one of these eggs, one that the Spectre had sworn to protect after the death of his companion. But what unsettled historians and wizards of the great empires the most was the possibility that this particular monument where the Spectre had found the explorer was one of the most feared, the monument containing the forbidden egg. According to ancient legends, one of the eggs scattered by Primus was never to be touched. The sorcerer, in performing the ritual, had warned the other pilgrims that this egg held the power to unleash an ancient evil, one that not even the mightiest of Yuggoth could contain. However, as with all forbidden legends, the prohibition only fueled the interests of the most reckless. It was uncertain whether the Spectre had truly found that egg, but the fact that he mentioned its care in his letter, along with the mystery surrounding Axi, only fueled speculations. The empires began to watch the Spectre's movements more closely, especially those already allied with him. The words, "I will take care of Axi," were not just a promise of protection, but perhaps the echo of a power that even the Spectre himself did not fully understand. The discovery of the letter and the rumors about the forbidden egg sent tremors through the fragile alliances among the empires of Yuggoth. The clan of the Dark Skulls and the Eternal Flint, who had closely collaborated with the Spectre, found themselves ensnared in a web of suspicions and tension. Questions about the Spectre's intentions began to circulate. Did he now possess a creature or artifact capable of subjugating the other empires? Had he found an egg that could grant him absolute dominion over Yuggoth's magical forces? The robot, always wary of hidden and supernatural forces, began fortifying his defenses around the remains of the ancient court of his empire. He knew that if the Spectre had access to the power of the forbidden egg, the balance of power in Yuggoth would shift dramatically. At the same time, the Warlock, known for his veiled ambitions and unstable alliance with the Spectre, began plotting his own schemes, perhaps seeking to exploit the uncertainty to achieve his own ends. The Spectre's letter, though brief, opened a chapter full of shadows and questions in Yuggoth's history. The rumors about the Monument of Discord and the Forbidden Egg spread like wildfire through the dry fields, and with them, suspicions among the empires grew exponentially. The Spectre's promise to care for Axi, whatever it was, became a new symbol of power and perhaps tragedy. In the vast and mysterious land of Yuggoth, the empires would watch closely, awaiting the moment when this enigma would reveal its true purpose, and alliances would waver once more, as had happened so many times in the cycles of rise and fall among the great empires. The Monuments of Discord and the mystery of the Forbidden Egg. Decades before the Spectre's letter shook the politics and balance of power in Yuggoth, the Monuments of Discord were already the subject of whispers amongst the boldest leaders and explorers. These ancient monoliths scattered across the vast and inhospitable territory of the planet held treasures and artifacts with the power to shape or destroy entire civilizations. Each of them housed an egg, left as a legacy of the world's creation by Primus, and was guarded by invisible forces older than the arrival of the first pilgrims. The danger these monuments posed was clear, but so was the allure of the unknown and the forbidden. Among the bravest explorers, two of the most powerful emperors of Yuggoth stood out, the Sun and the Robot. On that day, many years before the letter, both emperors ventured into one of the darkest and most feared monuments, a monument of discord deep within the western lands. As they reached the structure, which stood in the middle of a desolate landscape, they were met with a dense atmosphere, as if the very air was thick with imminent danger. The monument, formed by gigantic blackened stones, had always been shrouded in superstition, but the emperor's decision to explore this particular one had a purpose: the egg that lay at his heart. According to the ancient codices, this specific monument housed an egg with an unique power, one that defied the very laws of life and death. It was a wither skeleton egg, a creature of legend capable of summoning the darkest of curses. The texts warned that whoever awakened the wither would unleash a cataclysm, and those who dared to face it risked not not only their lives, but also the corruption of their very souls. As the sun and the robot delved into the depths of the monument, they finally found the dark chest containing the forbidden egg. The air grew heavy, almost unbreathable, and the temperature dropped abruptly as if nature itself rejected what was about to happen. The chest creaked as it opened, revealing the egg, which radiated a sinister energy, wrapped in a bluish glow that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. However, what happened next surprised those who knew both emperors and their ambitions. Despite the immense power that the egg offered them, something occurred in that moment that led them to return it to its chest and seal it once more. It was an unexpected decision, one that did not align with either of their usual dispositions. The codices and later accounts do not clearly explain what drove the sun and the robot to make such an unusual choice. Rumors began to circulate immediately, and over time, scholars and sages attempted to decipher the reasons behind their actions. Some believed that it was the sun, known for his moralistic nature and visions of a prosperous future for all empires, who decided to return the egg, fearing the dire consequences it could bring. Others, however, think it was the robot, who coldly calculated the risk and understood that unleashing the Wither skeleton would lead to unleashing the Wither. Despite granting immense power, it would lead to inevitable collapse, not just for him, but for all of Yuggoth and their empires. A third, darker theory, rarely spoken of, suggests that both emperors were victims of a curse that prevented them from touching the egg. It is said that upon opening the chest, an invisible presence, the will of Primus himself, manifested, forcing the emperors to desist. If this version is true, then neither morality nor calculation played a role in their decision, but rather sheer terror in the face of an unstoppable force. After sealing the egg once more, the sun and the robot left the monument in silence. They did not discuss what they had seen, nor did they share details of their experience with anyone. From that day forward, their paths began to slowly but surely diverge. What neither of them knew was that this moment would seal their fate. The disappearance of the sun years later would become one of Yuggoth's darkest mysteries. Some claimed that his ambition for supernatural power had driven him to return to the monument in secret, and that during this second incursion he had awakened the Wither skeleton. Others believed that he had simply fallen victim to an inevitable fate, marked by his contact with the cursed egg. The robot, on the other hand, withdrew into deep silence, becoming even more reserved. He began erecting walls around the remains of the ancient god in his empire, perhaps fearing that the Wither skeleton's egg curse might have haunted him. His empire flourished thanks to his industrial genius, but rumors of his involvement in the sun's disappearance never truly faded. The dark codices, which held the deepest secrets of Yuggoth, only briefly mentioned the encounter with the Wither skeleton egg. These texts warn that the eggs within the monuments of discord not only contain creatures of immense power, but also curses that transcend time and space. According to some ancient fragment, one of the eggs was not created by Primus, but by an opposing force, a primordial being whose sole desire was destruction. The fact that the sun and the robot returned the Wither skeleton egg to the chest was seen by many as an act of great wisdom, a recognition of the limits of power and the forces that no civilization should ever attempt to control. However, this act also left an unsettling question unanswered. What would have happened if they had chosen to break the seal and unleash the Wither's power upon Yuggoth? Years after the sun's disappearance and the robot's seclusion, the monument of discord remained an object of both fascination and terror. The Wither skeleton egg remained in its chest untouched, but the lingering question persisted. Would someone at some point dare to claim its power? The monuments were closely guarded by the empires, yet the legends of the curse that two of Yuggoth's most powerful emperors had nearly unleashed continued to echo among the younger generations. Ultimately, what transpired within the monument was not just a test of power, but also a reminder of the consequences that leaders' decisions can have on the fate of the entire world of Yuggoth. The monuments of discord remain both a legacy of hope and a warning of destruction, and those who dare approach them did so at their own risk or peril. The Assembly of the Four Crowns. The founding of the Assembly of the Four Crowns marked a turning point in the history of Yuggoth, a political decision aimed at mitigating the growing tensions between the sovereign empires. For years, the planet had been trapped in a fragile equilibrium, fueled by ancient rivalries and boundless ambitions, whilst the disappearances of powerful monarchs such as the Sun, the Confessor, and now the Seer sowed fear and uncertainty among the nations. The shadow of a devastating war loomed over every corner, and it was the Sorcerer, leader of the Band of the Hawk, who saw an opportunity to impose a new order before chaos completely consumed the known world. The Sorcerer summoned the three remaining monarchs: the Spectre, regent of the then unnamed Clan of the Dark Skulls, whose ability to manipulate shadows and mysteries granted him an almost mystical power; the Robot, whose mastery of industry and technology made him the most advanced in mechanical progress; and finally the Warlock, guardian of the then unnamed Eternal Flint, master of the arcane arts and the hidden forces of Yuggoth. The meeting took place in the sanctuary of the Pilgrims, a neutral and almost mythical land where even the stones seemed to remember ancient pacts and past betrayals. Around the table carved from the dark basalt of the mountains, the four monarchs engaged in a series of discussions filled with intrigue, distrust, and subtle power plays. None of them had forgotten past grievances or the personal ambitions that constantly kept them in the brink of conflict. But the Warlock's words carried weight. It was time to form a united front or risk mutual destruction. After hours of tense negotiation where tempers nearly reached a breaking point, the Warlock took the initiative. He knew the balance was fragile, and any misstep could trigger open war between the empires. With the calculated precision of his strategies, he drafted what would become the legal constitution of the sovereign empires of Yuggoth, a treaty that promised peace but concealed the sharp edges of military threats within its articles. The first article granted each monarch absolute rule over their empire, free from external interference, yet subject to the decisions of the assembly. Immediately, the Robot protested, fearing that this article would limit his capacity for expansion. The Sorcerer, in his enigmatic tone, simply reminded him that an empire could not expand if its enemies decided to unite against it, a veiled reminder of how fragile power was in Yuggoth. The second article, drafted by the Warlock regarding the right to name empires and emblems, sparked controversy. The Spectre, whose lands had yet to adopt an official name, was reluctant to accept any formalities that might restrict him. However, he understood that this clause would finally allow him to solidify his reign, unifying his followers under a single banner. It was Article number 4 that ignited the fiercest debate. The Assembly's right to wield military power against any empire that violated the Constitution turned the treaty into a double-edged sword. While it promised peace, it also established the foundation for the three remaining monarchs to subdue any one of them if they deemed it necessary. The ever-suspicious Robot demanded guarantees that his industrial projects would not be sabotaged under the pretext of a constitutional violation. The Warlock, with cunning, inserted a clause allowing for structural modifications to Yuggoth, ensuring that any decisions affecting the world's balance would first be subject to discussion. With the Sorcerer being the herald of Primus, such structural modifications could actually be achieved. As the treaty was debated, the disappearances of the Seer, the Sun, the Confessor, and the unnamed co-emperor of the Eternal Flint weighed heavily on the monarchs. A palpable sense lingered that something dark was lurking in the shadows, something beyond the ambitions of any one of them. Though none spoke of it openly, they all knew that the Seer's mysterious disappearance had been the catalyst for the Sorcerer to convene the assembly. His absence left a power vacuum within the Band of the Hawk, and the possibility that another empire might take advantage of its weakness was not far from anyone's mind. The Sorcerer, always shrouded in an air of mystery, seemed to know more than he let on. Rumors spread that he used his dark arts to locate the missing rulers, but what he had discovered had left him deeply unsettled. In secret, he feared that whatever had caused the co-emperor's disappearance was a force older and more dangerous than any battle between the empires, and for that reason alone, he pushed for the creation of the assembly. Not just to guarantee peace but to forge a united defense against whatever was lurking in Yuggoth's shadows. The culmination of the assembly was signing the treaty and the implementation of mutually assured destruction, an agreement ensuring that any attempted war between the empires would result in total annihilation for all involved. This idea, introduced by the Warlock in his second Imperial alliance with the robot, was a masterstroke. He understood that the best way to prevent a war was to ensure that no one could win it. Mutually assured destruction turned any potential conflict into Imperial suicide, forcing the monarchs to seek diplomatic means to resolve their difference, and not war. The Spectre and the Sorcerer, though initially wary of this concept, eventually accepted the proposal. It was a dangerous weapon, but also the only way to maintain the delicate balance between the empires. The Sorcerer, for his part, saw Mad as an opportunity to consolidate his control over the assembly, using laws and veiled threats to maintain order in Yuggoth. With the treaty signed and the assembly of the Four Crowns established, the empires of Yuggoth entered a new era. Peace, though tense and always on the brink of collapse, was upheld through veiled threats and mutual distrust. Each monarch knew that any betrayal or violation of the pact would lead to the downfall not just of their empire, but of all others as well. However, the dark forces behind the disappearances still lurked in the shadows, and while the assembly presented itself as a bastion of unity and stability, not everyone was convinced that it would withstand the storms ahead. The world of Yugoth watched in silence, waiting for the next move. Alliances were forged and broken in the dark corridors of castles and towers, and though mutually assured destruction had so far prevented total war, everybody knew that a single misstep would bring the fragile balance crashing down, engulfing the planet once more in flames of conflict. On screen, you have the legal constitution of the sovereign empires of Yuggoth, attached for the consideration and monitoring of the Assembly of the Four Crowns. All of these articles shaped the political world and the political dynamics of the world of Yugoth and the empires within it. The Lost Bastion, the secret expedition of the Band of the Hawk. At the dawn of the Yuggothian empires, when the Four Crowns had only just begun to consolidate their domains, and prior to the disappearance of the seer, the Band of the Hawk embarked on one of the most daring and enigmatic expeditions in the continent's history. An incursion to the Nether, an infernal and hostile dimension filled with unspeakable dangers and extraordinary resources. The Sorcerer, ever in search of forbidden knowledge, and the seer, a wielder of prophetic and mysterious powers, led a small party of explorers into this hellish realm. Their goal was not merely to collect rare materials, but both knew that something more lurked in the depths of the Nether. During their exploration, the group discovered a bastion, a colossal fortress of carved black stone, hidden in the most remote reaches of the Nether. This fortress, abandoned yet not deserted, was a remnant of the Piglin civilization, a society of pig-like humanoids once organized into warring clans. The Piglings had dominated much of the Nether, constructing their imposing bastions to safeguard their treasures and preserve their traditions, while others had taken refuge in the crimson and warped forests far from the battlefield. Inside the bastion, the explorers found ancient chambers that housed blacksmithing templates, artifacts of immeasurable value. Among them, the Nether blacksmithing template stood out as an item of great significance. With it, diamond armor, considered the pinnacle of power in Yuggoth at the time, could be reforged into netherite equipment. Alongside this relic, they uncovered another treasure, the Pigling blacksmithing template, a modified and refined version crafted by the Piglins' warrior culture. It was set to enhance the durability of weapons and armor against the perils of the Nether, while adorning them with ornamentation fit for an emperor of Yuggoth. However, despite their thirst for power, the seer and the sorcerer chose not to loot the bastion. Surrounded by hundreds of armored Piglins, they feared provoking their wrath and unleashing a curse that could endanger not only their empires but all of Yuggoth. As time passed, the bastion's location became a closely guarded secret, known only to the monarchs of the Band of the Hawk. Thus, the expedition remained a state secret, whispered only amongst the closest allies of the Seer and the Sorcerer. Decades later, while the other monarchs were entangled in political disputes and fragile alliances, the Warlock decided to act. Known for his calculating nature and deep inclination towards the arcane, he deemed the moment ripe to risk everything on a solitary incursion. Without informing the Assembly of the Four Crowns and without seeking the support of his allies, he ventured into the Nether, determined to accomplish what the Seer and the Sorcerer had not dared. The journey to the Bastion was fraught with peril. Nether creatures with their uncontrollable fury and brutality stood in his way. Yet the Warlock, armed with his vast experience and dark powers, overcame every challenge. At last he reached the Bastion. Unlike the previous explorers, he did not hesitate in fear or heed the warnings. With cunning precisions, he evaded the remnants of the Piglin Guard and descended into the depths of the fortress. There, in a hidden chamber, he found what he had been searching for, the blacksmithing templates. With a triumphant gesture, he claimed both. The Warlock had achieved what no one else had dared. He became the first monarch of Yuggoth to possess the means to forge netherite armor and weapons, a material far stronger and far more resilient than any other known to man. With these templates in his grasp, his empire, the Eternal Flint, would rise to unprecedented heights, surpassing his rivals not only in magic and arcane knowledge, but also in military strength. The Warlock's return to what was then the unnamed Eternal Flint did not go unnoticed. Though he had kept his nether incursion a secret, rumors quickly spread through the courts of other empires. The Spectre and the Robot, ever watchful, soon discovered that the Warlock had acquired the templates, granting him a significant military advantage. The delicate balance of power so carefully maintained by the Assembly of the Four Crowns now teetered on the brink. The Assembly, founded to prevent precisely these kinds of disruptions, was urgently convened. The Sorcerer, ever calculating and ambiguous, was the first to voice concerns over the dangers of allowing one empire such superiority. If the Warlock succeeded in outfitting his armies with netherite, the consequences would be catastrophic for any rival bold enough to challenge his dominance. The Robot, whose advanced technologies enabled the creation of unparalleled war machines, also expressed concern. Though his empire was rich in resources, he knew that the netherite granted not only strength but resilience against even the most devastating of attacks. The Spectre, ever shrouded in mystery and shadows, did not publicly voice discontent, yet in the dark halls of his castle he began weaving schemes of his own. He understood that the Warlock's acquisition of the templates could usher in a new era of conflict, and he was not about to be left behind. With the possession of some of the most powerful blacksmithing templates, the Warlock had rewritten the rules of power in Yuggoth. Tensions among the empires sharpened, and though the Assembly of the Four Crowns still stood, the specter of war loomed ever closer. The power of netherite, with its ability to transform armies and provide an unmatched advantage on the battlefield, had become the most coveted resource, and the shadow of conflict darkened the world of Yugoth. The Bastion, once forgotten, now stood as the fulcrum upon which Yuggoth's future would be decided. The fortress. 10 years after his successful incursion into the Nether's Bastion and his acquisition of the smithing templates, the Warlock, always in pursuit of knowledge and arcane power, made a discovery that would mark a new chapter in Yuggoth's history. While exploring the depths of the underworld, he found the first Nether fortress, a colossal and ominous structure stretching for miles across the infernal landscape, hidden amongst rivers of lava and the treacherous fire fields that defined that realm. This discovery was not only a strategic advantage, but also placed in the Warlock's hands two of the most significant elements in magic and warfare: wither skulls and blaze rods. These objects, long thought to be legends or myths, were real, and far more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. With them, the Warlock had the ability to shift the balance of power in Yuggoth entirely. Deep within the fortress, the Warlock discovered that wither skeletons, ancient guardians of the Nether, could be defeated, and in doing so, their cursed skulls could be obtained. These skulls, when combined with soul sand, were the key to summoning one of the most destructive and feared entities in Yuggoth, the Wither, the Guardian of Souls. Born from chaos and dark energy, this being had the power to annihilate entire cities and consume the life energy of its enemies, leaving devastation in its wake. On the other hand, blaze rods could be ground into a substance as volatile as it was magical, blaze powder. When combined with the eyes of the dark creatures known as Endermen, it was possible to create the first Eyes of Ender. These eyes were the key to searching for and locating the great stronghold, a massive fortress hidden in the deepest caves of Yuggoth, where the portal to the End resided, the home of the most feared creature in all of Yuggoth, the Ender Dragon. This ancient being, tied to the universe's secrets in the darkest forces of creation, represented both a threat and an opportunity. The possibility of controlling, or at least confronting, these entities opened new paths to dominion over Yuggoth. News of the Warlock's discovery of the fortress and their materials needed to summon the Wither and find the Ender Dragon quickly reached the other empires. The spies of the robot, ever watchful with their vast intelligence network, were the first to alert the master of the imminent threat. They knew that if the Warlock managed to use these materials to summon such creatures, there would be no force capable of stopping him. The Spectre, for his part, also took note of the situation. Though little was known about his empire or his true intentions, the Spectre understood better than anyone the danger these dark beings represented. He had already had his own encounters with the supernatural and knew that while the power offered by the Wither and the Ender Dragon was tempting, it would also bring unimaginable consequences. The Sorcerer, the most enigmatic of the monarchs, seemed more interested in studying the powers of the Nether and the End than in confronting their dangers. Though he was part of the Assembly of the Four Crowns, he maintained a calculated neutrality. He knew that any misstep could result in his destruction, and he also recognized that the secrets behind these beings could grant an unmatched advantage to whoever mastered them. The Warlock, ever pragmatic, quickly realized that merely discovering the fortress was not enough. He needed a steady supply of Wither skulls and blaze rods if he intended to consolidate his power. So he secluded himself for months within the dark and ancient halls of the fortress, fighting wave after wave of enemies day and night. What began as an occasional expedition soon became an organized collection system, with caravans of resources arriving at the then unnamed Eternal Flint, loaded with the Nether's most dangerous materials. This system allowed the Warlock to accumulate a considerable number of skulls and rods, granting him the ability to summon the Wither at any moment and begin the expedition to search for the mysterious stronghold. The Assembly of the Four Crowns, created precisely to prevent this kind of concentration of power, now faced its greatest trial yet. The monarchs gathered in secret to discuss the implications of the Warlock's discovery. The robot, always calculating and cold, suggested a military intervention before the Warlock could summon the Wither and or the Ender Dragon. He argued that allowing a single monarch access to such power would jeopardize the stability of all other empires. The Spectre, however, doubted that direct confrontation was the solution. He knew the Warlock was not one to act recklessly. If he had amassed these resources, it was because he had a plan, and any attack could trigger catastrophic consequences for all of Yuggoth. Instead, he proposed a diplomatic solution, though he knew dealing with the Warlock was like walking a tightrope. Meanwhile, the Sorcerer remained silent, observing the unfolding events with a distant gaze. Though he did not openly state his position, it was clear that he was weighing in all of the possible and potential advantages he could gain from this situation. The Nether Fortress and the secrets it held had set in motion a series of events that would test the fragile peace of Yuggoth. With the Warlock on the verge of unleashing an unimaginable power, the other monarchs found themselves at a crossroads. Should they unite to stop him before it was too late, or should they attempt to manipulate the situation to their own benefit? Time was running out, and the shadow of the Wither and the Ender Dragon loomed over the empires. The fate of Yuggoth hung by a thread, and the Assembly of the Four Crowns faced its greatest challenge yet: to maintain peace or plunge into total war, a war that could destroy them all. The third catastrophe, the rise and fall of the Eternal Flint. At the height of its power, the Warlock, Emperor of the imposing yet still unnamed Eternal Flint, had achieved what no other monarch of Yuggoth had before. After defeating the first Wither, the legendary guardian of the underworld and lord of fallen souls, he constructed a colossal emerald pyramid at the heart of its empire. At its peak, shining with an unrivaled radiance, stood the first celestial beacon in all of the world, powered by the mythical Hellstar, an artifact that granted divine protection and unparalleled power. The Eternal Flint Flint at that moment towered above all other empires, its vast territorial reach unmatched and its flourishing economy built upon the prodigious Eternal farms that sustained its growing population of over 50 villages. These farms not only provided abundant food but had also become a source of emeralds, the most precious currency in all of Yuggoth, allowing the Warlock to erect his pyramid and activate the celestial beacon, marking the zenith of the Eternal Flint. From the heights of his black stone tower, the Warlock gazed upon his vast dominion, fully aware that no other monarch, not even his rivals in the Assembly of the Four Crowns, could match his current power. However, at the heart of his greatness lurked an unforeseen danger. The ambition of Yuggoth's emperors knew no bounds, and the Warlock's power, though immense, was not without weakness. Soon, arrogance and greed would trigger an event that would forever change the fate of the Eternal Flint, the third catastrophe. The Robot, another emperor of Yuggoth and leader of a civilization known for its cold calculation and precision, formed a secret alliance with the Warlock. Together, they planned an epic battle against the keeper of infernal spirits, the Wither, an unstoppable creature of pure destruction. The alliance was forged through blood and sweat, promising a joint triumph that would solidify their dominance over Yuggoth. They chose to face the Wither in the deep caverns of the Eternal Flints, just 50 miles south of the celestial beacon, hoping to be bathed in its divine aura and turn the battle against the Wither into an easy endeavor. It was a dangerous distance, though. If anything went wrong, the repercussions could destroy not only the beacon, but the very heart of the Eternal Flint. Yet, blinded by ambition, both emperors underestimated the Wither's fury and the magnitude of the power that would be unleashed in the dark depths of the caverns. The battle was brutal. For endless hours, the two emperors fought side by side against the beast which roared with infernal strength, launching waves of dark energy that shook the earth and tore through the air. In a fit for power, the Wither charged directly at the emperors, unleashing an attack so devastating that both emperors were brutally dismembered and left for dead, their bodies looted by the Wither's skeletons guarding the caverns. The beacon, that luminous treasure symbolizing the pinnacle of their power, was destroyed along with the Emerald Pyramid, and with it, much of the Eternal Flint's grandeur crumbled. The Robot and the Sorcerer, stripped of the most powerful armor and weapons, fled, wounded and defeated. But the humiliation did not end there. Desperate, they journeyed into the sanctuary of the Pilgrims to seek the intervention of Primus, Yuggoth's creator god. Through his intercessor and herald, the Sorcerer, they begged him for a second chance, wanting Primus to manipulate the fabric of time and space to undo their mistakes and save the Eternal Flint before it was reduced to ashes. But the Sorcerer, well aware of the dangers of defying the universe's natural laws, outright refused. He called their request heresy and closed the Imperial Summit, pronouncing words that would resonate in Yuggoth's annals. The powers of Primus must not be touched, not even by the greatest among us. With that denial, the fate of the Eternal Flint seemed sealed. The greatest and most prosperous empire of the Assembly stood at the brink of total annihilation. Tragedy was not over. Just as in previous catastrophes that had shaken Yuggoth, the emperors were forced to sacrifice their lives repeatedly in a macabre festival of blood and flesh. Day after day, they hurled themselves against the Wither, only to be torn apart time and time again by its devastating power. Each death was more brutal than the last, and each resurrection left them weaker. They did not give up. For 15 nights of continuous battle, they finally managed to defeat the Wither, avenging the partial destruction of the Eternal Flint. The Robot, in a symbolic gesture, claimed the Hell Star as a historic token of the imperial union between the Robot and the Warlock. This star, forged in the darkness of the Nether and fueled by the souls of the fallen, represented not only victory over the Wither, but also the ancient alliance between both empires. A year after the catastrophe, the Warlock, determined to restore his empire's power, launched a series of mining expeditions seeking the precious ancient debris, a material imbounded with the souls of the Nether itself. This mineral, formed over thousands of years of fire and blood, was the key to crafting netherite, the strongest and most powerful material known in all of Yuggoth. With this new resource, the Warlock armed himself for future battles, summoning and defeating 5 more withers, obtaining 5 additional held stars, and consolidating his vengeance for the 3rd catastrophe. Though the 3rd catastrophe was a devastating blow, the Eternal Flint survived. But it was never the same again. The destruction of its beacon and the laws of its Emerald Pyramid were stark reminders that even the most powerful of empires could fall. The Warlock and the Robot, though victorious, had paid a steep price for their ambition. However, the defeat over the Wither and the acquisition of ancient debris marked the beginning of a new era of power for the Warlock. With his new netherite armor and weapons, and under the protection of the Held Stars, he was more prepared than ever to face the challenges ahead. Yet, the scars of the 3rd catastrophe remained, and the echo of destruction resounded in every corner of the Eternal Flint. The other empires of Yuggoth watched closely. The assembly of the 4 crowns was never the same again. Tensions among the monarchs grew, and although the alliance between the Robot and the Warlock remained firm, everyone knew that the balance of power in Yuggoth was fragile. The 3rd catastrophe had altered the course of history, and Yuggoth's fate was far from decided. However, once the dark veil of adversity that had engulfed the Warlock and his empire was lifted, the Eternal Flint was officially founded as a sovereign empire of Yuggoth, becoming the first empire to declare its sovereignty and title within the assembly of the 4 crowns. The discovery of the Band of the Hawk. 30 years after the 3rd catastrophe. The history of Yuggoth is marked by intrigue, politics, and secret alliances that, like an underground river, shape the destiny of empires. Among these episodes, few were as momentous as the discovery of the Band of the Hawk, an empire whose origins in exile after the discovery of the sun were as mysterious as its location. Under Yuggoth's unsettling stars, the Warlock, a monarch known for his mystery of arcane magic and the handling of the darkest secrets, embarked on a quest that would not only shift the balance of power, but also reveal a hidden truth that had remained in the shadows for nearly a century. It all began during one of the first formal meetings between 2 of the most powerful emperors of Yuggoth, the Warlock and the Sorcerer. Despite the differences, both monarchs shared a common vision. The stability of the assembly of the 4 crowns depended on all empires being under equal scrutiny. However, a mystery loomed over them like an invisible sword: the whereabouts of the Band of the Hawk, an empire whose location had never been revealed and which, despite its silent influence on the council's affairs, remained an elusive shadow. The Sorcerer, a master of political strategy and manipulation, summoned the Warlock to a meeting at a site rich with symbolism, the ruins of the first Eternal Flint, an ancient bastion of power that once belonged to a fallen empire and now lay in decay. It was a reminder of the fragility of empires, an echo of what once was and what could be again. The Warlock, always calculating, arrived at the meeting with caution. He scanned the landscape with a sharp eye, noting every detail in his mind as a potential key to unlocking the mystery that consumed him. From his vantage point, he saw the Sorcerer approaching from the coast, advancing towards the ruins of the first Eternal Flint, along a path that followed the river's course. This detail did not go unnoticed by the Warlock, whose mind began weaving hypotheses. The Sorcerer, whether knowingly or not, had revealed a clue. His arrival from the west suggested that his movements might be linked to the coastal region across the rivers near the Western Passage. This small revelation could prove crucial for what was to come. The meeting in the ruins ended with a tense but courteous conversation that characterized gatherings between Yuggoth's emperors. However, for the Warlock, the real task was only beginning. Inspired by the information unwittingly provided by the Sorcerer, he set out to locate the empire of the Band of the Hawk, a goal that had eluded all sovereigns for years. The Warlock was a master of energy manipulation and knew every corner of Yuggoth's magical realms, but this search required not only magic but also cunning and patience. For days he traveled the western coast, following the subtle clues left behind by the Sorcerer. It was an arduous process, fraught with uncertainty uncertainty and danger, as Yuggoth's geography was relentless and every step into the unknown brought him closer to both the truth and the risk of being discovered. Finally, after days of exploration, the Warlock found himself before a vast expanse of fertile land, dotted with signs of life. Well-tended crops, grazing animals, and what appeared to be a provisional earthen base. Though rudimentary, the settlement was clear evidence that the foundations of a future empire were being laid. The Band of the Hawk, still in its infancy, was taking shape, hidden from the rest of the world but inevitably tied to Yuggoth's destiny. The Warlock knew that what he had found was not just a location, it was a political advantage. A revelation that, if used wisely, could shift the balance of power in the Assembly of the Four Crowns. At the moment, the empire that would later be known and feared as Falconia was merely a promise, a whisper of what would one day become one of the most formidable realms of Yuggoth. Armed with the knowledge of the Band of the Hawk's whereabouts, the Warlock did what he did best: maneuver in the shadows. He did not immediately share his discovery with the entire assembly. Instead, he approached two of the most powerful emperors, the Robot and the Spectre. Both monarchs, though powerful in their own right, understood that any strategic advantage in Yuggoth's imperial game had to be exploited carefully. The Robot, known for his cold precision, immediately grasped the value of the information provided by the Warlock. The location of the Band of the Hawk meant that, at last, all of Yuggoth's empires could be tracked, monitored, and, if necessary, attacked. For him, the ability to establish geopolitical parity among the empires was vital for maintaining his own power. The Spectre, always shrouded in mystery, knew that knowledge was power and that the secret of the Band of the Hawk's location could serve as a tool for persuasion or blackmail in the future. Though the Warlock had shared the information with him and the Robot as a gesture of goodwill, the Spectre always played the long game, and he was already beginning to weave his own plans in the shadows. Thus, a secret alliance was born in between the Warlock, the Robot, and the Spectre, a coalition that, though discreet, would ensure political equilibrium within the Assembly of the Four Crowns. With the location of the Band of the Hawk now uncovered, all sovereign empires of Yuggoth were finally on equal footing. The mist that once obscured the whereabouts of one of Yuggoth's most enigmatic empires had dissipated, and the emperors knew that the next move in the grand game would not take long to come. The Band of the Hawk was beginning to lay the foundations of a new empire, and the Sorcerer was working from the shadows to give the Band of the Hawk a new identity and form, thus beginning the first steps towards what would be known nearly a century later as the Empire of Falconia. The discovery of the Band of the Hawk's empire was not only a strategic achievement for the Warlock, but also a catalyst for a new era of tension in Yuggoth. With all empires under the Assembly's scrutiny, alliances began to waver, and the unstable peace that had kept the emperors in harmony for decades began to show its first cracks. The Sorcerer, unaware of the discovery, continued devising his own plans, while the other monarchs patiently awaited the right moment to use the newfound information to their advantage. The monuments of power, battle for resources, and the struggle for hegemony in Yuggoth were only beginning. In the years to come, the political intrigue sparked by the discovery of the Band of the Hawk would give rise to conflicts of an unprecedented magnitude in Yuggoth's world. And so, as the empires consolidated their power and prepared their next move, one thing was certain: the balance of Yuggoth would never be the same. The Invader. 30 years after the discovery of the Band of the Hawk. The legends of Yuggoth are filled with omens, signs, and dimensional breaches that bring forth dark and unknown forces. But few events shook the Assembly of the Four Crowns as much as the appearance of the Invader. A feared figure who crossed the boundaries of his own reality and threw the delicate balance of power between the empires into chaos. The arrival of the interdimensional criminal was not a mere invasion, it was an episode that exposed the cracks in alliances, the fragility of the empires, and the ancient mysteries of the world. At the center of the conflict lay a dimensional breach. This strange and sporadic phenomena had been observed throughout Yuggoth's history, but few were prepared for the devastation it would bring this time. It opened in the most unexpected place, the Valley Forests, a crucial zone dividing the borders of two very powerful empires, the Eternal Flint and the Empire of the Robot. This vast region, teeming with life and mysticism, had been a place of peace since time immemorial, protected by ancient customs and a reverence for the past. At its heart stood the skull of the unknown god, an ancient monument whose roots stretched into forgotten mythology. mythologies, its meaning still a mystery even to the very wise sages of the assembly. When the invader emerged from the breach, chaos was immediate. The forests, considered sacred by many, were consumed by black flames that seemed to devour not only the wood and earth, but the very essence of the place. The fire left permanent scars in the valley, devastating the landscape and destroying the ancient mystical protections that had remained unbroken for centuries. But beyond physical destruction, the invaders' attack was seen as a direct insult into Yuggoth's monarchs, who until then had believed themselves invulnerable to external forces. One of the first to respond was the Empire of the Robot, a power known for its military strength and precision in construction. Under the command of the Robot Emperor, the immediate construction of a bridge was ordered over the river, dividing their territories from a mysterious clan, one that had remained unnamed until that moment but would later be known as the Clan of the Dark Skulls. This bridge, an imposing feat of engineering, connected the technologically advanced civilization of the Robot into the wilder, less explored lands of the clan. Though its construction had been seen as an act of expansion and control, it now seemed that the bridge may have facilitated the invaders' arrival in those forgotten lands. After destroying the nearby forests, the invader followed the bridge's path and, according to later investigations, reached the territories of what was then the unnamed Clan of the Dark Skulls. However, the invaders' power was too great to be contained by the Empire's forces. The looting of their land was swift and ruthless, and the clan suffered material losses, exposing a clear breach in the security of their vaults. The invaders' presence in Yuggoth unleashed not only a storm of physical destruction, but also a diplomatic crisis. The Sorcerer, ever astute and enigmatic, knew that allowing such a powerful entity to roam freely through the empires would endanger the fragile peace maintained by the Assembly of the Four Crowns. Upon hearing reports of the looting and devastation spreading through the valley, he decided to act. The Sorcerer, whose mastery of dark arts and ancient magic was unrivaled, possessed an artifact feared by all the sovereigns of Yuggoth, the Tablets of Milith. These relics were more than mere tablets. They were weapons capable of completely eradicating the soul of any being condemned by their power. The Sorcerer, the Herald of Primus, was the only emperor who had access to such relics. Legends spoke of the tablets as means to erase not just life, but also the memory, the very essence of those who were marked. In a secret ceremony hidden from the eyes of other emperors, the Sorcerer invoked the tablets. Essence of the invader was extracted from his body, stripped of any possibility of redemption or return. His soul was embedded into the tablets, pulverized by the ancient power that had governed them, and with a single act, the Sorcerer ensured that the interdimensional criminal would never set foot in Yuggoth again, sealing the breach that had caused so much destruction. However, the use of the Tablets of Milith was not well received by all. Though the invader had been neutralized, the use of such dark and powerful magic raised new concerns about the Sorcerer's dominion. The Assembly of the Four Crowns, already weakened by growing tensions between the empires, viewed the Sorcerer's actions with suspicions, fearing that such power could one day be used against them. The invaders' intervention in Yuggoth left behind a legacy of distrust and fear. The Empire of the Robot, which had built the bridge for political and strategic purposes, now found itself under scrutiny. Rumors had spread that the Robot Emperor had inadvertently facilitated the invaders' arrival by allowing the bridge's construction into the territories of the Clan of the Dark Skulls. Though there was no concrete evidence of his complicity, tensions between the empires grew, and some began to question the Robot's true intentions. On the other hand, the Sorcerer's decisive action in eliminating the invaders solidified his position as one of Yuggoth's most feared monarchs. Though his methods were questionable, few could deny their effectiveness. However, the shadow of the Tablets of Milith grew over all sovereigns, a reminder that even the most powerful souls could be erased from existence. The Assembly of the Four Crowns, once a symbol of unity and balance, now showed deep fractures. The emperors moved with greater caution, knowing that any mistake, any breach in their power, could be exploited by their rivals. And at the heart of this new order, the memory of the invader remained as a symbol of a warning, a reminder that even in Yuggoth, where monarchs ruled over vast empires, there were forces that could never be controlled. The invader had been defeated, but the breach he opened in Yuggoth's balance would not be so easily sealed. The thefts. 20 years after the arrival of the invader, the world of Yugoth had seen many eras of greatness, alliances forged through blood and sweat, but it was also submerged in a sea of intrigues, distrust, and rivalries that seemed never-ending. In the annals of history, there is a dark and enigmatic chapter known as the Thefts, a series of disappearances that threatened to unravel the already fragile relationships between the monarchs who ruled the Assembly of the Four Crowns. What began as a mere conversational accusations among the emperors would soon soon turn into a dangerous political game with Yuggoth's fate hanging by a thread. It all started with an accusation. The robot, one of Yuggoth's most powerful and calculating monarchs, claimed that 50 diamonds had disappeared from the imperial coffers of his vast kingdom. These diamonds were not just a symbol of wealth, but the result of years of mining in deep caverns of his territory. To the robot, the loss of these resources was seen as a direct insult, an attack that threatened not only his economy, but also his reputation. But the robot, always meticulous and strategic, did not openly accuse anyone. He knew that a reckless move would destabilize the delicate relationships holding the assembly together. However, deep down, his suspicions pointed towards the Sorcerer, another of Yuggoth's great monarchs. The Sorcerer had recently visited the robot's domain to collect a pair of saplings from the swamp trees, a rare species whose reddish interior was perfect for constructing his new project, Falconia, the capital of his growing empire. The robot couldn't ignore the fact that the Sorcerer's visit mysteriously coincided with the disappearance of the diamonds. Although he lacked conclusive evidence, his mind, sharpened by years of politics and war, could not overlook the coincidence. The distrust between their empires, already fueled by centuries of rivalries, now intensified like a fire fanned by the winds of betrayal. While the accusations against the Sorcerer lingered in the air, another event shook the foundations of the assembly. The Confessor, a mystical and enigmatic figure whose influence in Yuggoth had waned after a prolonged and mysterious disappearance, suddenly returned to the political stage. There are no historical records in the annals regarding his mysterious reappearance, only to find that his imperial stables had been ransacked. Horses, elaborate armors, and most unsettling of all, living steeds had vanished without a trace. The Confessor, whose connection to the occult was well known throughout Yuggoth, did not see these thefts as mere acts of vandalism. To him, the disappearance of the horses and their equipment carried a much deeper meaning, perhaps a hidden warning. Upon reclaiming his position of power as a co-emperor, he wasted no time in informing his fellow monarchs, the robot and the Warlock, of the crimes committed in his absence. Although there was no tangible proof, the Confessor was convinced that these disappearances were linked to the same mysteries surrounding the thefts in the robot's empire. As tensions among the emperors rose, the Warlock, master of the arcane and possessor of ancient knowledge, decided to intervene. In a secret meeting deep within his domain, the Warlock revealed to the robot and the Confessor something he had kept secret for decades. A private conversation he had once had with the Sorcerer, long before the creation of the assembly of the Four Crowns. In that conversation, the Sorcerer had disclosed his darkest ambition: to become the antagonistic force of Yuggoth. His philosophy was simple yet devastating. All progress in the world must arise from conflict. In his vision, nations and empires could only reach their full potential if they faced calculated opposition, constant challenges that forced them to grow and adapt. The Sorcerer had voluntarily offered himself to be that antagonistic force, the villain in Yuggoth's history, with the mission of sowing chaos and, in doing so, driving the development of the empires. The Warlock's revelation left the other monarchs in shock. Although the Sorcerer had not been formally accused of the thefts, this confession of wanting to manipulate Yuggoth's event through conflict made him the prime suspect. The robot, the Confessor, and the Warlock began connecting the dots. The disappearances, the thefts, and the Sorcerer's ambitions all seemed to align in a sinister conspiracy threatening Yuggoth's stability. Despite their growing suspicions, the three emperors decided not to act immediately. The Assembly of the Four Crowns had its rules, and bringing accusations without concrete evidence before the judicial house could spark a war between the empires. Though they were convinced that the Sorcerer was behind the thefts, they could not afford an open confrontation without proper proof. Instead of resorting to legal measures, the monarchs chose to keep their suspicions secret and continued monitoring the Sorcerer's actions. But this decision was not an easy one. Every day that passed without action allowed the Sorcerer to continue weaving his plans from the shadows, and the peace that held the assembly together grew more and more fragile with each whisper of betrayal. Doubt spread across Yuggoth. The Warlock, the Robot, and the Confessor knew that the Sorcerer was playing a dangerous game, one in which every move was carefully calculated to sow discord among the empires. But acting too hastily could unleash a war none of them were prepared to face. The politics of Yuggoth were a minefield, and any misstep could trigger the total collapse of the Assembly of the Four Crowns. The Sorcerer, meanwhile, continued playing his role with the same calculated calm he had maintained for centuries. He knew that suspicions pointed towards him, but that did not concern him. To him, every accusation was merely another step in his grand plan. The thefts were only the beginning, a prelude to something far greater. As the emperors consumed themselves in doubt, he continued planting the seeds of chaos, waiting for the right moment to reveal his hand. The sorcerer's vision was clear. Only through destruction and conflict could the empires of Yuggoth reach their true potential. If that meant stealing, lying, and manipulating the other monarchs, he would do so without hesitation, because in his mind, he was not the villain, he was the architect of a grander future. Thus, the fate of Yuggoth was sealed. Caught in a game of shadows and betrayals, the thefts, though seemingly minor, were the tip of the iceberg of a much larger conflict looming in the horizon. The distrust among the emperors grew, and with each passing day without a resolution, they edged closer to war. Meanwhile, the sorcerer watched from the shadows, knowing that sooner or later Yuggoth would fall into his hands, or destroy itself in its struggle for power. The future of the empires, the monarchs, and the assembly of the Four Crowns was at stake, and the game had only just begun. The disappearances. The disappearances that shaped the history of the Assembly of the Four Crowns and its territories became the heart of the intrigues that cloaked Yuggoth in its darkest shadows. It was during those uncertain times of theft and suspicion within the Assembly that the Confessor, a figure as enigmatic as he was feared, mysteriously returned to his lands. No one truly knew where he had come from or why he had chosen to return, but one thing was certain: his return coincided with an unprecedented period of power in his empire. The Confessor resumed his role as co-regent and, in his function as the imperial confessor, wasted no time in exerting his influence in the darkest corners of the court. His methods of extracting information from prisoners were as feared as they were admired by his allies. It was said that no soul could withstand the confessor's cold and unyielding will, and soon his reports became the foundation upon which the empire's most important decisions were made. Under his leadership, the lands of the clan began to expand through raids and war campaigns. Exploring vast, unknown expanses, the imperial expeditions returned laden with prisoners, riches, and resources, and each victory cemented the Confessor's position as one of the most influential and fearsome figures in the realm. Among the clan's most common assaults were the pillager towers, feared groups of mercenaries, raiders, and assassins from Yugoth's vast lands, along with villages and small, mostly undeveloped civilizations of pilgrims or semi-humans. However, although the war machine and expansion efforts ran with clockwork precision, the atmosphere at court grew increasingly oppressive. The omnipresent figure of the Confessor, with his piercing gaze and relentless pursuit of information, cast a mantle of fear over all the kingdom's inhabitants, even those who called him an ally. The co-regent of the Empire of the Robot, the Sun, had not been seen since his mysterious disappearance decades ago. Though his name appeared in ancient records as one of the founders of the Empire of the Robot, his prolonged absence had fueled countless rumors. Some said that the Sun had fallen from grace and had been exiled by the Robot, while others believed he had succumbed to an arcane curse that kept him in deep slumber. In the forests of the valley, farmers and peasants whispered that the Sun wandered through the enchanted woods, living off of his hunting and bound to the natural order of his wild surroundings. They claimed to have seen him smile at those who stumbled upon him in the mountains, hills, waterfalls, and cliffs of the valley's forests. However, after the arrival of the invader and the complete destruction of the valley's forests, the region's inhabitants, along with their customs, stories, and rumors, had vanished. In the court, few dared to mention his name aloud, and those who did spoke in hushed voices, fearing that the robot himself might hear them. Yet the most mysterious and enigmatic disappearance was that of the Seer, co-regent of the Band of the Hawk, a remote and near mythical faction whose lands had remained hidden from the Assembly of the Crown for decades. The Seer appeared at the imperial court in intervals so long and irregular that many considered him more a legend than a man of flesh and blood. The few who had seen him spoke of his ethereal gaze, his cryptic words, and his ability to foresee the fate of empires. The miners of the Band of the Hawk had formed a kind of cult in his reverence to the absolute certainty of the Seer's predictions. Among all ranks of his cult, they repeatedly spoke of how the rise and fall of the Eternal Flint, the arrival of the invader, and even the lava weeping from the ancient god in the robot's possession had been described with the precision of an omnipresent being decades before they happened. He was a figure who seemed to exist beyond reality, as if his mere presence was an omen of things to come. The Seer's detached relationship relationship with the present events was enough to fan the flames of a rumor that reached the ears of every emperor. The seer had disappeared. The Band of the Hawk had remained hidden for so many decades that no member of the imperial court could definitely confirm whether the rumors were true. The seer's return occurred at a crucial moment, shortly after the thefts had shaken the foundations of the assembly, and when the sorcerer had begun constructing the great castle of Falconia. Although the seer's appearances remained scarce, and his involvement in imperial affairs limited, his reappearance was enough to signal to any empire that he had officially returned. When his shadow fell over the deliberation tables, an uneasy silence spread among those present. They knew that his mere presence meant something dark was coming, but no one dared to ask. Meanwhile, in the Eternal Flint, another co-regent had vanished years before. The mysterious figure who had helped found the empire. It was he who had overseen the construction of the first village, not just of his empire, but of the entire assembly. Over time, this first village would become the epicenter of a vast island dominion, where every cliff, beach, hill, and plain of the island would be settled by more than 100 villages nearly a century after this mysterious figure disappeared. On the very day that the village's construction was completed, he vanished into the mist of a foggy morning, following a night storm that had ravaged the island's coast with the force of the very Primus. No one ever knew what had happened to him. Some believed he had traveled to even more distant lands in search of forbidden knowledge, while others claimed he had fallen victim to betrayal within his own court. As the years passed, disappearances and reappearances became woven into the political fabric of Yuggoth, and each prolonged absence or unexpected return brought with it a new wave of rumors and intrigues. The nobles of the court, ever watchful, scrutinized every movement of the Confessor, the seer, and other regents, trying to decipher what underlying plot lay behind each action. The Confessor's power continued to rise, and his enemies began to fear that his thirst for control had no end. But beneath the surface, something darker was stirring. The war prisoners, growing more numerous by the day, began to vanish from the dungeons of the then unnamed Clan of the Dark Skulls without a trace. Whispers in the taverns and the dark hallways of the court spoke of forbidden rituals and secret pacts, and many began to question whether the power accumulated by the Confessor and the other regent was solely the result of their cunning and military might, or if far more sinister forces were at play. Meanwhile, the seer continued his enigmatic appearances, and though his prophecies were few and cryptic, his words left an indelible mark on those who heard them. The few who dared to analyze his words in public spoke of a future in which Yuggoth's great empires would collapse under the weight of their own ambitions. Or others, however, interpreted his visions as a more immediate warning and began preparing for the chaos to come. And so, as the empires continued expanding, as wealth flowed, and as prisoners disappeared into the darkness, the disappearances and reappearances of key figures like the Confessor and the seer continued weaving a web of intrigue and suspicion that enveloped the realm like an invisible spider's web, ever present yet never fully understood. The glory days of the Eternal Flint seemed distant, and in the shadows, the future of Yuggoth hung in the balance. The Castle of Falconia, 45 years after the thefts. In the fertile lands of Yuggoth, beneath the skies shrouded in perpetual clouds and mountains that seemed to defy the very cosmos, time moved with the slowness of the stars. As empires struggled to consolidate their influence and expand their domains, the sorcerer and his co-emperor, the seer, wove an ambitious plan that would shape the destiny of one of the most enigmatic and powerful empires in Yuggoth's history, Falconia. It was on a misty day that the first walls of what would become the castle of Falconia were erected, a monumental fortress that would mark the beginning of the Band of the Hawk's supremacy over these unknown lands. In those years, the construction of the castle was not only a symbol of power, but also a tangible manifestation of the monarch's dominions over a new territory. The sorcerer took the lead in the edification of this fortress. As the workers dug and laid the foundation stones, the seer, having returned from his enigmatic expeditions, lent his assistance. Rumors spread that the seer possessed the mystical connection with the forces surrounding Falconia, a bond he used to ensure that the construction progressed without obstacles. The castle was not merely a structure of stone and wood, it was a symbol of the Band of the Hawk's rise and a declaration of imperial intent. The construction of Falconia represented the last effort of one of the four sovereign empires to solidify its presence in Yuggoth. Though the Warlock and the seer were eager to proclaim their dominance, the castle was completed without an immediate official declaration. exploration. In the years following the completion of the Great Castle, Falconia remained in the kind of shadow, a secret kept by the Sorcerer and his followers. The castle stood on the border of the known world, a fortress of power and mystery that silently observed the movements of its neighbors. Occasional visitors described the place as a labyrinth of stone and magic where the walls seemed to whisper ancient spells and the halls echo with remnants of forgotten prophecies. The Dragon. In the vast and dark world of Yuggoth, where the balance of power fluctuated like the tides of an unknown sea, the 5 great emperors, the Warlock, the Sorcerer, the Robot, the Spectre, and the Confessor, gathered beneath a clouded sky in the ominous bastion of the then unnamed clan of the Dark Skulls. This meeting was not a mere courtly assembly, it was a strategic summit destined to confront the most feared of enemies, the Ender Dragon. The purpose of the gathering was as bold as it was monumental: to defeat the Ender Dragon and obtained the legendary elytras, wings that promised not only technological expansion but also aerial dominance over Yuggoth. In the stone halls of the Dark Clan, the emperors discussed the current state of their weaponry and the strategies to face the dragon, an adversary whose very existence had tormented Yuggoth for generations. As the empires sharpened their swords and stocked their supply chests, the Warlock and the Confessor undertook a crucial task: locating the stronghold, the hidden fortress that contained the portal to the end. With the same rigor and precision expected of them, they gathered Ender Pearls, transformed them into Eyes of Ender using blaze powder obtained from blaze rods, and embarked on an expedition that took them 15 days to find the concealed fortress. Once inside the fortress's winding labyrinths, libraries, and mysterious corridors, after a grueling 19-day search, they finally discovered the end portal and constructed a tunnel connecting the fortress to the surface, securing access for the entire Imperial delegation. At last, after weeks of arduous preparations, the emperors assembled to launch their decisive attack. The 4 crowns ventured into the end dimension, facing the majestic and terrifying Ender Dragon. The battle that ensued was one of the bloodiest in Yuggoth's history. The dragon, with its infernal roar and devastating attacks, proved to be a formidable opponent. Chaos erupted when a flaming arrow deflected by one of the dragon's wings struck the Spectre fatally, killing him instantly. The tragedy deepened when the Sorcerer, confronting the dragon's fury, was slain repeatedly. The battle seemed endless, yet the emperor's determination never wavered. Finally, after a grueling and heartbreaking fight, the 4 crowns triumphed over the Ender Dragon. Wasting no time, they began the search for the elytras in the vast floating islands of the End. These islands, suspended in the void, were guarded by relentless waves of Endermen that attacked without mercy, turning the quest into an odyssey of survival and perseverance. The journey across the floating islands was a monumental challenge. Trapped in an alien and hostile dimension, the emperors built long bridges to connect the islands while fending off constant Enderman assaults. The Robot, driven by a sense of urgency and determination, was the first to find the elytras and escape the End, followed closely by the Warlock, the Confessor, the Spectre, and finally the Sorcerer. However, luck was not on everyone's side. After securing his precious elytras, the Sorcerer suffered a fall into the void, a tragic fate that highlighted his sacrifice compared to his fellow emperors. This loss was a brutal reminder of the dangers lurking in the End's abyss and the thin line between glory and ruin. The emperor's return to Yuggoth marked an irreversible shift in the balance of power. The victory over the Ender Dragon and the acquisitions of the elytras not only granted a new level of technological and strategic capability, but also left a deep scar on the souls of the empires. The Sorcerer and the Spectre, with their sacrifices in battle, became legends, while triumph and the return to normalcy brought a renewed equilibrium to Yuggoth's political landscape. The battle against the Ender Dragon and the quest for the elytras became an epic saga, a narrative of sacrifice, ambition, and unyielding spirit of Yuggoth's emperors. Through tragedy and triumph, the 5 emperors forged a new era, marked by their bravery, their vision, and the imposing legacy of the last crusade against the dragon. The Great Robbery. In the tangled paths of power and betrayal that weave the fate of Yuggoth, there was an event that marked a dramatic turn in the political balance of the world. The catastrophe in the then unnamed clan of the Dark Skulls and the unprecedented theft of elytras, which altered the very fabric of the assembly of the 4 crowns. The times were tumultuous and the secrets were dark. The Confessor and the Spectre, in a quest to master the arts of dimensional manipulation, delved into dangerous experiments with the nether portals. Their goal was to control and harness the vast power of the infernal dimensions, manipulating space in order to access more distant lands and to manifest in multiple places simultaneously. However, their ambition led to a disaster of epic proportions. One of their incursions, poorly calculated and reckless, culminated in a cataclysmic explosion that devastated the main castle of the then unnamed Clan of the Dark Skulls. The castle, a symbol of their power, laid in ruins, and with it, the clan's economic position and organizational structure crumbled. The devastation not only weakened the physical fortress but also fractured the clan's intentional cohesion and its defensive capabilities. Desperate and desolate, the Confessor and the Spectre withdrew, seeking respite amidst the calamity. However, their return was met with a new crisis. Upon returning to the ruined fortress, the Confessor discovered that a pair of elytras, treasures of incalculable value, had disappeared from their chest. The theft of the elytras was the spark that ignited the power keg of distrust among the empires. The losses were not limited to the elytras. Previous thefts were also remembered, intensifying suspicions and unease. The political atmosphere became charged with tension, and the unity of the Assembly of the Four Crowns was threatened like never before. The Warlock, who had already accumulated reserves of distrust towards the Sorcerer, wasted no time in raising open accusations. In a move that only escalated the crisis, the Warlock publicly accused the Sorcerer of being the instigator behind the thefts, not only of the elytras, but of a series of loots that had taken place within the empires. The accusation was not merely a matter of personal discontent, it became a public charge that sharpened tensions among the empires. The response was swift and severe. The Robot, the Warlock, and the Confessor, in an act of strategic alignment, consolidated their political alliances and strengthened the bonds between the empires. The bloc of three empires, now united in a common vision, began to distance itself from the Sorcerer, who found himself at the center of a political storm. The Sorcerer, known for his philosophy of being an antagonistic force that defies norms and order, became entangled in the whirlwind of his own beliefs. His role as an antagonist, one he had promoted himself, became more tangible and real. In the following years, the Confessor and the Warlock took distrust to new and higher levels. Their espionage journeys became an obsessive routine marked by constant surveillance of the Sorcerer and the Seer. They hid for long hours in the shadows of the then unnamed Falconia, deploying a network of surveillance to monitor every move of their rivals. The two emperors constantly flew to infiltrate the heart of the empire, hoping to uncover evidence of treason or a hidden evil plan. Their efforts, however, proved fruitless. Despite constant surveillance, the Warlock and the Confessor failed to obtain any evidence confirming the Sorcerer's involvement in the thefts or revealing the existence of a secret base. Intrigue and suspicion interwove within Yuggoth's politics, but the truth remained elusive. The lack of concrete proof did not stop the deterioration of relationship between the empires. Distrust persisted, and the echoes of the accusations still resonated in the emperor's courts. The politics of Yuggoth became a chessboard where every move was laden with paranoia and ambition, and the Sorcerer's image as an antagonistic force became further cemented in the collective imagination. The catastrophe in the then unnamed Clan of the Dark Skulls and the Great Robbery became dark chapters in Yuggoth's history. The political crisis that erupted as a result of these events left deep scars on the power structure and on the dynamics of the relationships between the empires. The distrust sown during this period altered the balance of power and ignited a series of conflicts and alliances that would endure over time. The legacy of these events would be remembered as a period of betrayal and despair, where ambition and power collided in a devastating way. And Yuggoth's politics were shaped by the shadow of distrust and intrigue. In the echo of the ancient castles and the ruins of the empires, the story of robberies and catastrophes would continue to serve as a warning about the dangers of betrayal and the cost of power. The New Era of Yuggoth. A period spanning approximately 5 decades, the Great Robbery took place in the first of these 5 decades. In the vast and tumultuous world of Yugoth, a new era of splendor and ambition rose from the ashes of the past. The empires, rejuvenated by the acquisition of the coveted elytras, experienced explosive growth in their technological, material, and military capacities. The acquisition of these mythical wings allowed the emperors to soar through the skies and expand their domains at an unprecedented speed, marking the the beginning of a golden yet turbulent age. The Confessor, the Spectre, the Robot, and the Warlock carried out multiple asynchronous incursions into the floating islands of the End, aiming to raid and plunder more floating ships to secure additional elytras. All incursions were successful, with the sole exception of a failed expedition led by the Spectre. The Eternal Flint and the Clan of the Dark Skulls, two of the most prominent empires in the Assembly of the Four Crowns, embarked on a glorious era of expansion. Taking advantage of their newfound ability to fly, both empires exponentially increased their reserves of precious materials and weaponry. The chests overflowed with netherite, emeralds, diamonds, iron, coal, and gold, tangible symbols of their growing power and ambition. The Clan of the Dark Skulls distinguished itself through architectural feats, particularly the construction of its new royal library, as well as the meticulous and constant improvement in the ranks of scholars and mages who oversaw it. They built a majestic lighthouse that illuminated the horizon, moved their main residence to a new castle, and erected floating islands that defied the laws of gravity. The first castle, now transformed into the royal library, became the nerve center of magic and commerce in Yuggoth, housing a collection of the most powerful and valuable enchantments in the world. The establishment of this commercial hub elevated the Clan of the Dark Skulls to a dominant position in the magical trade network, strengthening its influence and wealth. Meanwhile, the Eternal Flint unveiled a series of breathtaking structures and monuments. The Great Pyramid of Sheltron, along with the geometric magma edifices adorning the pyramid's interiors and the skies of the Eternal Flint, symbolized the empire's magnificence and power. Floating islands provided structural support to its main castle, from which nether portals extended. Massive lava falls adorned the empire's skies, complementing the immense tower, the central castle, and a colossal obelisk which became the largest unnatural structure in all of Yuggoth. The immense obelisk, with its entrance adorned by the immense streams of lava, discouraged any visitors from stepping inside. However, rumors circulated that the Warlock spent weeks within its vast black stone walls. Some believed that he was working on an ambitious project, while others suspected that the monumental structure served as a conduit to connect with the oldest and most powerful spirits of Yuggoth. A massive automatic farm in the skies of the Eternal Flint, added to the system known as the Eternal Farms, ensured a constant supply of resources. Meanwhile, the expansion of its lands led to the ambitious endeavor of covering a large portion of the surrounding ocean, which later became the foundation of new farmlands, royal gardens, and a vast cherry tree forest. This transformation solidified the empire as a bastion of prosperity and grandeur. The now fully covered island housed a commercial population of over 100 producing villages, reflecting the economic vitality of the empire. The Eternal Flint now hosted a variety of colossal monuments erected by the Warlock himself. A colossal mass of floating moss, wreathed in a dense forest of towering trees, creeping vines, and radiant glowberries that shimmered like stars in an eternal twilight. Waterfalls cascaded from its edges, vanishing into the mist below. An immense current of molten lava coursed through its heart, a searing artery of fire that illuminated the heavens with an ominous glow. Beneath this celestial isle lay its mirrored reflection, a second, equally vast forest of moss and shadow stretching endlessly across the land below. The twin landscapes, one floating and one rooted, bore witness to the dark designs of the Warlock. Both forests and the skyline above them were adorned by immense stair-like geometrical structures that contained forests within them. Into the ocean and across the moss forests, a massive structure was erected in which the fungi forests of warped fungus from the nether were extracted and now planted in a gigantic forest. Rising from the land, an obelisk unlike any other, the second of its kind, yet dwarfing the first, loomed over the land. Its monolithic form was adorned with veins of magma within its vast body, and an immense cross of cascading lava burned eternally, a beacon of power that could be seen from every corner of the empire. To the east of this structure, piercing the heavens itself, stood an immense black stone torch, wreathed in blue flames that defied the natural order. At the heart of this eldritch kingdom stood the castle of the Warlock, a citadel of unyielding granite, its walls forged from the bones of the earth itself. Three immense circular towers, each a fortress unto itself, reached skyward, their interiors concealed beneath a canopy of towering jungle trees that thrived within the castle's stone embrace. Within the castle, structures of crying obsidian stood in solemn silence, monuments of grief and power, where the Warlock displayed his most opulent treasures, suits of netherite netherite armor, infused with the very essence of the nether's unrelenting darkness. Vines and glowberries wove through the architecture, their luminescence casting eerie shadows upon the polished stones, illuminating the chambers where only chosen few were permitted. And above them all, towering over the Warlock's domain like the manifestation of a forgotten deity, stood a structure that defied comprehension. A colossal tower composed of 5 inverted pyramids stacked upon one another in a display of impossible geometry. At its corners, 4 relentless streams of lava descended in perfect symmetry, their crimson glow tracing the edges of the monumental spire as if sealing within it a power too great to be unleashed. In contrast to the frenzied expansion of their contemporaries, the robot maintained a more measured pace. His empire, still unnamed, focused on expanding its Great Wall, a monumental project designed to protect its vast territorial expanse. During the excavations carried out for the wall's construction, strange round objects were unearthed, which, when fully uncovered, were revealed to be the fingers of the ancient god whose body had been lent for the construction of the great empire. This discovery gave rise to a new legendary emblem, confirming eerie rumors about a hand being found during the empire's early construction expeditions. The skull of the ancient god, now covered with a helmet of arcane and ancient metals, came to life, displaying glowing magma runes that adorned its face with a mystical radiance, adding a layer of mystery and power to the already imposing presence of what became known as the Empire of the Robot. The robot and the sorcerer shared a more restrained perspective on imperial expansion. Although the robot managed to accumulate valuable minerals like diamonds and a moderate amount of netherite, the focus was more on consolidation and protection rather than direct competition with their rivals' aggressive expansion. The sorcerer, for his part, also adopted a less aggressive stance, limiting himself to completing the construction of the Falconia castle and securing his lands. The apparent political resignation raised concerns and suspicions about the sorcerer's true intentions and the future direction of the then unnamed Falconia. His apparent calm stood in dark contrast to the fervent growth of other empires. This apparent political resignation raised concerns and suspicions about the sorcerer's true intentions and the future direction of the then unnamed Falconia. His apparent calm stood in stark contrast to the fervent growth of the other empires, and his decision to halt expansion and focus on his castle and lands raised eyebrows in the assembly of the 4 crowns. Some viewed the Band of the Hawk's lack of visible action as a covert strategy and an attempt to quietly amass power, while the other empires competed in a frantic race of expansion and conquest. The new era in Yuggoth, marked by a relentless growth and dazzling development, was also witness to increasing intrigue and distrust. The emperors, each with their own plans and ambitions, navigated a sea of alliances and rivalries, with the balance of power constantly at stake. The history of this era would be written not only in the grand structures and accumulated riches, but also in the political machinations and strategic moves of Yuggoth's leaders. In this world of shadows and splendor, every decision and every action would echo through an era of both greatness and conspiracy. The farms of the new age. Within the intricate web of powers and alliances that define Yuggoth, the development of new technologies and the exploitation of crucial resources not only strengthened empires but also heightened rivalries and competitions between them. In this era of relentless expansion and ambition, resource farms and advancements in the manipulation of magic and monsters have become the cornerstones of imperial growth and supremacy. The robot, renowned for its meticulous planning and technological mastery, undertook the construction of a cutting-edge monster farm. This mechanism, a marvel of engineering and sorcery, was designed to harness the appearance of nocturnal creatures and the subsequent elimination to re-up natural resources. The farm provided a constant supply of gunpowder, essential for the production of fireworks and the expansion of the Empire's aerial dominance, as well as bones, rotten flesh, arrows, and armor, vital elements for both military and economic progress. The gunpowder, obtained from the explosive demise of creepers, became the lifeblood of its flight systems, allowing the robot to remain at the forefront of technological and wartime advancements. Meanwhile, the Warlock erected an imposing obelisk at the heart of its empire, within which he established the second monster farm. This monumental structure not only served as a symbol of its power, but also provided an inexhaustible source of gunpowder and the same organic materials the robot's empire had begun to exploit. The Warlock, too, maintained a self-sustaining flight system, propelling his dominion to new heights of control and and influence. The continuous flow of materials and the ability to command the skies granted both empires a significant strategic advantage in their aspirations and conflicts. In an unforeseen turn of events, the then unnamed Clan of the Dark Skulls, upon discovering the Monument of Discord previously encountered by the robot and the sun, stumbled upon an object of immense power, the Wither Skeleton Egg. This discovery, set against the backdrop of rivalries and hidden truths, became a catalyst for the ascension of the Spectre and the Confessor. Working closely with the oldest scholars and scribes of Yuggoth, who all resided within the royal library, the clan unearthed profound knowledge of magic and arcane rituals. Among their discoveries lay a cursed ritual, one that enabled the fusion of an egg with a monster spawner, thus creating an infinite generator of the original creature bound to the ritual. Armed with this knowledge, the Spectre and the Confessor constructed their Wither Skeleton farm, producing a ceaseless flow of Wither Skulls. This unbroken cycle of production not only strengthened the Clan of the Dark Skulls, but also granted them a unique imperial identity, forging their emblems and solidifying their presence in the world of Yugoth. Through this, they achieved their official founding as the Clan of the Dark Skulls, elevating the value of the Wither Skulls to the highest echelons of Yugoth, not only as a sought-after resource, but as the very essence of their imperial identity woven into their name itself. By integrating the Wither Egg into their imperial structure, the Clan of the Dark Skulls found the ultimate symbol of power and distinction. Their Wither Skeleton farm became a testament to their dominion, a force that not only fueled their economy, but also reinforced their influence in the political intrigues that governed Yugoth. This granted them an overwhelming military advantage over their contemporaneous emperors, for with their control over the Wither Skulls, the clan wielded destructive capabilities far superior than any other empire. The success of the robot and the warlock in constructing their monster farms, alongside the Clan of the Dark Skulls' discovery and exploitation of the Forbidden Egg, not only enhanced their imperial might, but also exacerbated tensions between the great powers. The relentless competition for resources, dominance, and technological superiority intensified rivalries, leading to an intricate dance of conflicts and strategic alliances that defined the age. The growing mastery of flight and the control over magical and material resources created a delicate balance amongst the empires, each maneuvering with their strengths and secrets to maintain their standing within Yuggoth's grand power struggle. Monster farms became the ultimate symbol of boundless ambitions and the relentless pursuit of supremacy, exposing the depths of strategy and intrigue that characterized this era of splendor and war. In a world where power was measured in resources and technological prowess, every discovery and advancement wove itself into the intricate tapestry of power and rivalry that dictated the fate of Yuggoth's empires. The Secret Plan. At the opulent height of the Eternal Flint and the Clan of the Dark Skulls, where prosperity had become as burdensome as glory itself, competition amongst empires had intensified. Expansion and progress had slowed, and the search for new ways to ensure survival and supremacy had become a priority for the leaders of Yuggoth. In this climate of unrest and ambition, the Warlock devised a secret plan that would shift the balance of power on the continent. Frustrated by the stagnation of his empire's evolution, the Warlock decided to shift his focus from visible, grandiose expansion to a more clandestine and preventive strategy. He abandoned the construction of the great hanging gardens of his empire, an immense structure emerging from the surrounding oceans that was completed decades later. Instead, he dedicated himself to creating a network of hidden passages using nether portals to access a remote land, far from the reach of other empires. His vision was to build a provisional base in a secure location that could serve as a refuge and starting point in case of war or calamity. The Warlock's chosen route was an arduous journey filled with challenges. It began in the Eternal Flint, following the river that snaked through the great valleys that only passed through the imposing Akara Mountains that emptied into the ocean. He crossed the ocean starting from the towering cliffs at the foothills of Akara's peaks and sailed towards a chain of smaller islands where he excavated a new secret passage and built the first nether portal of his hidden network. On the other side of the portal, the Sorcerer found himself in a dense crimson forest, an ideal place place to conceal an ice tunnel, which he ultimately constructed. This tunnel stretched for kilometers southwest of the terrestrial plane. At the end of the tunnel, he built the final nether portal, which transported him to a desolate desert near a sand village. The desert bordered massive valleys, canyons, and rocky mountains in barren lands. At the frontier between the desert and the wastelands, the Warlock dug a secret passage, beginning the underground construction of what would become a hidden fortress. This refuge would not only provide a strategic defense in times of war, but also serve as a secure vault for his empire's most valuable resources. With the recovery of its second monarch, the Confessor, the clan of the Dark Skulls resurged with renewed strength, surpassing the Eternal Flint on all fronts. Meanwhile, the Seer, who had remained inactive in Falconia, left the clan of the Dark Skulls as the only empire with two actively ruling emperors. This situation allowed the clan to advance exponentially in resource acquisition and wealth accumulation, outpassing any other empire. In an unexpected turn of events, the Robot was summoned to a private assembly with Warlock. In this secret meeting, a covert alliance between the Eternal Flint and the Robot's empire was discussed and sealed. This strategic agreement marked the beginning of a hidden collaboration aimed at jointly confronting potential future threats under a unified front of the two empires. The Robot, being the first to learn about the Eternal Flint's secret passages, agreed to collaborate in the construction of a similar base. He traveled to the mountains of the wastelands and selected a site for his own secret base. This location, near the Warlock's hidden fortress, would form part of a network of underground shelters, creating a concealed empire that both emperors could use for defense in case of a cataclysm or invasion. The creation of these secret bases was not only a precaution against possible external threats, but also a way to safeguard the most valuable resources of both empires. These underground hideouts became the last bastion of security and power in a world where imperial tensions could unleash the horrors of war. The secret alliance between the Eternal Flint and the Robot's empire began to take shape, leading to an unprecedented cooperation. Aware of their vulnerability as single monarch-led empires, they joined forces to develop a robust defense and survival strategy. This covert collaboration allowed them to advance in their agendas while keeping their true intentions and capabilities hidden. Thus, in a world of intrigue and hidden strategies, the secret plan of the Warlock and the Robot not only reshaped Yuggoth's political landscape, but also laid the groundwork for future confrontations and alliances. In the silence of their underground fortifications, the empires built their last hope for security and dominion, ready to face any challenges the future might bring. The Smithing Templates, the hidden legacy of Yuggoth. In the depths of time, in a young and untamed Yuggoth, the ancient guild of blacksmiths flourished, their secrets as powerful as the gods who once walked their lands. For centuries, these master artisans perfected legendary smithing techniques, enchanting armor and carving details that only the greatest emperors could wear. However, the guild vanished into the veil of history, and with it, its most sacred tools, the Smithing Templates. These templates, deliberately hidden in chests within ancient monuments and structures, were scattered across the vast world of Yugoth. They became lost relics, known only in whispered stories and legends told by scholars and sung by bards around campfires. It was said that whoever gathered these templates could forge armor imbued with such power and beauty that even the heavens would tremble. Thus, an unrelenting race began among the emperors of Yugoth, each willing to risk their empire and their lives to obtain these sacred objects. The clan of the Dark Skulls and the Eternal Flint, two of the most powerful empires of Yugoth, had already acquired some of the smithing templates, specifically those hidden in the depths of the End, the Nether, and the ruins scattered across Yugoth's vast world. With these templates, the emperors, the Confessor, the Spectre, and the Warlock began forging armors that dazzled with magnificence, enhancing their might with an aesthetic worthy of legends. However, despite their growing glory, they knew their collection of templates was incomplete. The chests of the ancient cities, mysterious enclaves deep underground, held the rarest and most ornate smithing templates. The depths of the Nether still concealed a legendary template as well, and little was known about the ancient temples scattered throughout Yuggoth, where the rituals of long-dead religions hinted at the presence of smithing templates within their sacred chests. Thus, the Robot, the Warlock, and the Confessor allied to embark on one of the most perilous expeditions in Yuggoth's history. their mission to recover two of the most legendary smithing templates hidden in the depths of the Nether and the ocean's abyss. The expedition began in Yuggoth's most treacherous and feared place, the Nether, the infernal dimension. The three emperors set out knowing that the success of their mission could change the fate of their empires. For months they ventured into the heart of the Nether, exploring forgotten fortresses, crossing seas of lava, and facing hordes of demonic creatures. The trials they endured were not only physical but also emotional. Death lurked around every corner, and in a fateful collision with a mountain whilst flying at a great speed, the Warlock met his end, drowning in an ocean of lava. His death was not only a tragedy for his empire, but also left the Confessor and the robot devastated, yet determined to complete their mission. 2 months later, exhausted and wounded, the two surviving emperors finally discovered the smithing template of the dead within a fortress. It was a relic of incomparable power, imbued with the essence of lost souls in the Nether. The victory was bittersweet, but they knew they had to continue. With their first objective achieved, the emperors traveled back to Yuggoth's terrestrial plane through a Nether portal. Once on the surface, the journey back to Yuggoth was arduous. For months, the Confessor and the robot flew over forests, deserts, oceans, mountains, rivers, valleys, and savannas, but soon the fireworks ran out, leaving them unable to fly. Forced to walk, their bodies and spirits were pushed to the limit as they advanced towards the sanctuary of the Pilgrims, the only known refuge before returning to their empires. During this journey, fate smiled upon them. Deep within a dense and suffocating jungle, they discovered an ancient temple, forgotten by time, and within it they found the smithing template of the jungle. The engravings on the template spoke of an ancient power dating back to Yuggoth's earliest days, where jungle beasts rule over the planet. This discovery renewed their strength, but they still had a long road ahead. Months later, whilst navigating the ocean depths, the emperors encountered an aquatic temple where the currents and waters concealed the smithing template of the ocean. With this template, they finally possessed the ability to forge armor imbued with the power and beauty of the seas. Nearly a year after their departure, the Confessor and the robot returned to their respective empires. Exhausted but victorious, they were received as heroes. With the templates in their possession, they shared them with the Warlock, honoring the original members of the expedition and his tragic sacrifice. The emperors ushered in a new era of power and prestige. They shared the discoveries with the other empires, but not without reserving for themselves the deepest secrets of the templates they had obtained. Although the smithing templates represented power and prestige, they also whispered a warning. The stories of the vanished blacksmith guild reminded the emperors that all power comes at a cost. As they forged their legendary armors, the leaders of Yuggoth could not ignore the shadow of the guild's disappearance, nor the warning hidden in the symbols engraved on the templates. Absolute power always demands sacrifice. The future of Yuggoth loomed over them like a sharpened blade, and although the emperors had returned victorious from this extreme incursion, the threat of new alliances, betrayals, and future wars remained on the horizon, in a world where Yuggoth's deepest secrets were yet to be revealed. The arrival of the Eighth. 45 years after the issuance of the blacksmithing templates. At the twilight of Yuggoth's golden age, when empires were at their peak and monarchs ruled with an iron fist, a disturbance in the delicate balance of power was about to unfold. It all began with a mysterious invitation received by the Seer, one of the oldest and most enigmatic emperors. The letter, sealed with the Sorcerer's insignia, announced the arrival of a new monarch. The Sorcerer, master of dark arts and manipulator of dimensions, had summoned the Hound, an ancient comrade of Yuggoth's original 7 pilgrims, who had accompanied them on their most significant ventures centuries ago. Through the forbidden Millith tablets, the 8th Emperor of Yuggoth had been invoked. Rumors spread like wildfire through the imperial court. It was said that the Sorcerer, always cunning and full of hidden ambitions, had summoned this new monarch to reinforce his own ranks and make his empire the first to be ruled by 3 emperors. However, upon his arrival, the Hound denied such speculations. Instead of aligning himself with the Sorcerer or any other monarch, he chose to break away from the old canons and establish his own empire in the south, in lands so distant that their echoes barely reached the halls of power. But before departing, the Hound accepted the Seer's offer, a guided tour of the 4 great empires of Yuggoth. The Seer, who had not actively participated in imperial politics for decades, had once been a pillar in the creation of the Assembly of the 4 Crowns. However, over Over the years, his lack of involvement had relegated him into the background. Inspired by an old journey organized in his honor by the Warlock, where he had traveled through all 4 empires in search of inspiration, the seer decided to replicate the experience for the Hound. Together, they toured the lands of the Eternal Flint, a prosperous empire that held secrets and hidden alliances, and the never-named Empire of the Robot, which at the moment was excavating around the buried hand of an ancient god, an artifact shrouded in mysticism and danger. On their final stop, the Clan of the Dark Skulls, they were received by the Confessor, who forced them to relinquish all their belongings, armor, tools, and food, storing everything in a chest. He achieved this through the threat that if they did not comply precisely with his orders, he would kill them and loot them of all their possessions, which in itself would be an absolute crime against a monarch of the Assembly of the Four Crowns and an open declaration of war against every allied empire of the Seer. However, the enchanted hammer in the Confessor's hand was enough to instill total terror in their souls, making them obey his orders to the letter. The hammer was the most powerful weapon in all of Yuggoth. It was a legendary weapon that could only be forged using the heavy core, a mythical element crafted from the alloy of extraterrestrial metals whose origins, though unknown, were believed to be from an ancient asteroid that struck Yuggoth's shores over 100,000 years ago. The heavy core could only be found in the trial chambers of Primus, the vast underground chambers where Primus had seeded mechanisms that generated the world's most dangerous and violent monsters. Only the strongest warriors, those capable of proving their battle prowess by surviving relentless waves of assaults in the trial chambers, could earn the chance to obtain one single heavy core. The unparalleled military advantage granted by this legendary weapon forced both monarchs into submission before the Confessor. His actions were brutal. He locked them in an obsidian chamber where for hours he subjected the emperors to physical and sexual tortures that would stain their legacy forever. Fear and terror filled the air as both monarchs endured the unleashed violence of their host. By nightfall, the Spectre freed the monarchs. Despite the brutality they had suffered, the Spectre gave them each a netherite ingot as a compensation, sealing an immediate amnesty. This gesture was enough for both the Seer and the Hound to grant forgiveness, though the physical and mental scars would never fade. However, the question on everyone's lips was, why had the Confessor, who had always been cruel, inclined himself to commit crimes of such nature? As the empires watched with horror and fascination, dark rumors began to spread through the imperial court. Some claimed that the Confessor's soul had been corrupted by the forbidden egg, a cursed object that both the robot and the son had discovered but chosen not to touch. This egg, it was said, harbored a malevolent power, and those who fell under its influence were prone to acts of violence and unspeakable darkness. Had the Confessor been corrupted by this cursed power? Or perhaps, as others suggested, his brutality had always been latent, waiting for the right moment to manifest. Other rumors began circulating in the imperial court, questioning the mysterious return of the Confessor to his role as regent. Had he been corrupted by dark forces during his time of disappearance? Speculation was abundant, but answers were scarce. What was clear, however, was that the Confessor's atrocities had left an indelible mark in Yuggoth's politics. The echoes of his brutality quickly reached the Assembly of the Four Crowns. The Sorcerer was one of the first to respond. In a brief yet ominous statement, he simply said, "I watch you. I know what you did." His words resonated through the dark halls of the Clan of the Dark Skulls, a reminder that nothing escaped the Sorcerer's gaze, especially when it involved the co-regent of his empire. For his part, the Warlock called for a private council with the Spectre, seeking to resolve the matter diplomatically. He reminded the Spectre that before the creation of the Assembly, they had been the first to form an alliance. However, the Spectre, impassive in the face of accusations, merely stated that what had transpired between the Confessor, the Seer, and the Hound was a legal transaction under imperial agreements. The netherite ingot, according to him, represented adequate compensation and thus no crime had been committed. After their release, the Hound was invited to join the Clan of the Dark Skulls in what seemed to be a strategic move to extend their influence over the newly arrived monarch. However, the Hound declined. The Confessor's brutality and the Spectre's cold response marked a profound shift in in Yuggoth's politics. As empires continued to accumulate power and alliances, the wounds inflicted among them began to poison their relationships. The arrival of the Hound, far from strengthening peace, had exposed the cracks in the assembly's foundations. Yuggoth, a world ruled by ambition, betrayal, and absolute power, was on the verge of an unprecedented era of turmoil. The shadows looming over the empires were not just of past crimes, but also of dark forces that remained hidden, waiting for the moment to rise. While the Sorcerer had long been considered the original architect of Yuggoth's greatest political adversities, perhaps that role would soon be diminished by even more powerful agents of evil, willing to act in the name of their darkest desires. Falconia. The Empire of Falconia was officially founded by the Sorcerer and the Seer upon the completion of their castle's construction. It became the third and final sovereign empire of Yuggoth to claim its sovereignty through a royal appointment. The Wrath of the Confessor. The formation of alliances in Yuggoth was always an act of unstable balance, and few knew how to pull the strings of politics like the Warlock, one of the oldest and most powerful monarchs on the continent. From his fortress in the Eternal Flint, he had orchestrated a network of espionage and subterfuge so vast that his influence reached every corner of the Assembly of the Four Crowns. However, even the most skilled puppet masters could lose control of their marionettes, and what began as a cautious strategy of survival and expansion ended in a political catastrophe that threatened to ignite war. For years, the Warlock and the Confessor, the second sovereign of the Clan of the Dark Skulls, had maintained a secret alliance based on mutual convenience. Whilst the Assembly of the Four Crowns debated the great conflicts of the continent, the two emperors shared vital information about their empires, sealing non-aggression pacts that, at least on the surface, benefited both sides. The Robot, the third emperor with vast power, remained distant, distrustful of the maneuvers between his peers, but not alarmed enough to intervene. Thanks to the expeditions that united these three monarchs and the newly forged secret alliance between the Warlock and the Robot, a strong thread of information began to weave between the emperors. Knowing that the shadows provided refuge for those who knew how to use them, the Warlock decided to begin constructing a secret base in the wastelands, far from the commotion and the immediate threats, a secret pact he had shared only with the Robot. Although access to this information was limited even within his own circle, the Confessor was informed of the project's existence as a gesture of mutual trust. In exchange, the Confessor shared details about his clan's secret tactics and arsenals, including a vast stockpile of wither skulls, artifacts capable of summoning powerful destructive entities feared throughout Yuggoth. For 5 long years, the construction of the secret vase advanced without major issues, and the Confessor was periodically updated on its progress. The relationship between the Warlock and the Confessor seemed solid, built on the understanding that power, when kept secret, could shield them from the blows of open politics. However, in the 6th year of their alliance, something changed. Without warning, the Confessor was consumed by an indescribable rage, an outburst that baffled the imperial court. Where there had once been cordial exchange, now violent and exaggerated accusations arose. The Confessor unexpectedly cursed the Warlock, accusing him of using their alliance for his own gain and deliberately hiding critical information about the secret base. His venomous words echoed through the dark halls of his own fortress. "You have worked in the shadows for too long. Your base is nothing but a monument to your betrayal." The Warlock, alarmed but always calculating, attempted to reason with his former ally. He approached the Confessor in an effort to uncover what had caused such drastic shift in his behavior, but no matter how many arguments he used, the Confessor's fury did not wane. The Eternal Flint was denounced as a treacherous empire before the Assembly, a conspirational kingdom plotting its survival and expansion at the expense of the rest. The courts of Yuggoth trembled upon learning that the Confessor, in a fit of rage, had begun to hunt the Warlock's secret base. Using ancient locator maps, relics of the past and flight, he scoured the continent's inhospitable lands, determined to unearth the secret that had been kept from him. The Robot, always pragmatic, observed from the shadows, measuring every move with the precision of his circuits, but still undecided on how to act. The Warlock, aware that his position was in danger, fled to the Nether, a dimensional plane that offered means of evading his adversary's immediate pursuit. In that vast and and desolate place, he waited for the Confessor to abandon his search. However, peace would not last long. Faced with rising tensions and the possibility of an open conflict, an Imperial Parliament was convened, bringing together the Robot, the Sorcerer, and the Confessor. The assembly, meant to serve as a forum for diplomacy, quickly became a battlefield of words. The Confessor arrived wrapped in his dark mantle, his gaze fixed on the Warlock with barely restrained fury. Instead of seeking solutions, he demanded absolute control of the strategic information of all empires. The Confessor, ever unpredictable, spoke of the need for all Imperial secrets to be fully disclosed to the assembly, especially those related to bases and arsenals. He threatened to unleash a biological war if his demands were not met, a clear reference to the Wither Skull arsenal his clan possessed. The Warlock, trying to defuse the situation, offered to reveal the details of his secret infrastructure to the Confessor. "I will show you everything I have. My tunnels, my portals, my passageways. There are no more secrets to keep between us," he pleaded, hoping to pacify his adversary. But the Warlock's words fell on deaf ears. The Confessor, his mind already consumed by paranoia and distrust, rejected the offer, accusing him of attempting to redeem himself only because he had been discovered. "I no longer want your secrets now that I already have them. You built your castle in the shadows, and now that shadow will consume you," he said with a twisted smile. After hours of heated debates, with the assembly on the verge of collapse, the Confessor finally agreed to be taken to the Eternal Flint's secret base. Guided by the Warlock, they traversed the vast underground tunnels that snaked between Yuggoth's land, a masterpiece of magical engineering and stealth. The hidden passageways cut through the ancient ruins, magma caverns, and deep ravines unknown to any other empire. As they descended into the base's depths, the Confessor observed with growing interest, yet his expression remained dark and malicious. He knew that by uncovering all of the Warlock's secrets, he could manipulate the balance of power in Yuggoth. However, what truly lurked in the Confessor's mind was a mystery to all, even to his former ally. With the revelation of the secret base, tensions seemed to ease temporarily, but everyone in the assembly knew that the balance of power in Yuggoth had been irreversibly altered. The Confessor, with access to the Wither Skulls, now wielded the threat of total destruction, and his ambition for hegemonic control over all military intelligence loomed over the assembly of the Four Crowns like a dark cloud. The Warlock, for his part, understood that his former ally was no longer the man with whom he had forged pacts in the past. Something had changed within the Confessor, something dark, something even he could not foresee. The Robot, always calculating, remained on the sidelines, his own plans wiring in his mechanical mind. The Confessor's wrath had not been fully appeased, and the war blades continued to be sharpened in the shadows. The peace that existed in Yuggoth was, as always, fragile, and everybody knew the next conflict would not only be one of steel and blood, but of dark magic, deep secrets, and countless betrayals. The Secret Alliance. The last Imperial Parliament had made clear what many in Yuggoth had already feared in whispers. The era of balanced crowns was in decline. The Confessor, now consumed by fury, stood as a looming threat, and the dangers of biological warfare was drawing ever closer. His threats had not fallen on deaf ears, and both the Sorcerer and the Robot knew that the Confessor would not hesitate to unleash his arsenal of Wither Skulls. The assembly of the Four Crowns, once a symbol of peace and stability among the empires, now trembled in the brink of collapse. After the tense and chaotic meeting, where the Parliament had failed to establish any tangible solution, the Warlock and the Robot decided to meet in private, far from the eyes and ears of the spies that proliferated throughout Yuggoth. In the deepest corridors of the Eternal Flint, their conversation would make a turning point in the continent's history. The Warlock, cunning and ever cautious, was reluctant to engage in direct conflict with the Confessor. He knew that open war would bring devastation to his lands, and that even if he managed to prevail, the cost would be immense. The Robot, with its mechanical precision and analytical mind, agreed. Both emperors were aware of the magnitude of the threat. The Confessor, with his arsenal of withers and his unbridled rage, had the power to decimate entire empires in a matter of days. "We cannot face him as we are now," said the Warlock, his voice barely a whisper in the resonant chambers of the Eternal Flint. "His strength is immense, and our power is not enough to balance the scales. If he truly unleashes biological warfare, there will be no refuge, no magic that can protect us." The Robot, with its cold logic, responded, "Then we must match his power. Wither skulls are the ultimate weapon in Yuggoth, but they are not exclusive to the Confessor. If we obtain our own arsenal, we can contain his fury, deter him from initiating the conflict. Parity is the only possible solution. The plan was risky, but necessary. Both the Sorcerer and the Robot knew that if they did not match the Confessor's destructive power, they would stand no chance in the coming war. Thus, the two Emperors began plotting how to use the Wither skeleton farms deep within the Clan of the Dark Skulls. By accumulating enough power to summon their own Withers, they could balance the power struggle between the three empires. But this was not a simple game of chess. The Confessor, though blinded by rage, was not an enemy to be underestimated. Not only could he have access to weapons of mass destruction, but his connections as regent of the Clan of the Dark Skulls granted him a vast network of spies, assassins, and arcanists who operated in the shadows. As the Warlock and the Robot devised their plan, they knew that any misstep would be detected. The Confessor had already demonstrated his ability to locate the Eternal Flint's secret base, and it was likely that he also had some knowledge of the Robot's hidden refuge. The decision was swift and silent. They had to abandon their current bases, leave behind any trace of their former defenses, and establish a new fortress, one hidden from the Confessor's gaze and all of his allies. It was not enough to have power, they also had to protect themselves from the reach of that power. The Confessor knows too much. Our positions are compromised, said the Warlock, as he unveiled an ancient map that displayed the barren lands and hidden paths leading to the Nether, a plane of existence beyond Yuggoth. We must go somewhere he cannot follow. The Robot nodded, its mechanical eyes gleaming with cold determination. The Nether is our best refuge. No creature from this world can survive there unprepared, and the Confessor has yet to show any interest exploring it. Thus began the second phase of their alliance. The two Emperors, along with the most loyal armies and followers, crossed the portals into the Nether, a dimension of fire, lava, and creatures that defied Yuggoth's logic. There, in that hellish landscape, they selected the perfect location to build their new base. The hostile environment provided them with natural defenses, and the vast underground caverns were ideal for hiding their stockpiles of Wither skulls and other magical resources. As their mages and builders began erecting the new fortifications, the Warlock and the Robot discussed the next steps. Construction would be swift, as both knew that time was not on their side. Rumors about the Confessor's biological weapons were already spreading across Yuggoth, and no one knew exactly what they were, but speculations about their destructive power grew with each passing day. The Confessor, in his madness, had vaguely spoken of using these weapons to unleash a purge that would wipe out his enemies of the map, but the details were scarce. However, both the Warlock and the Robot knew that they could not afford to wait until threats became a reality, and it was evident that the Confessor was talking about the Wither skulls and unleashing a vast amount of Withers on every single empire. In the dark heat of the Nether, amidst the landscape of boiling lava and rising fortresses, the Warlock and the Robot watched the fruits of their secret alliance unfold before their eyes. Their united front, unknown to the rest of Yuggoth, could be the key to winning the war. Their goal was simple: survival. But survival in a war like theirs required more than mere defenses. It demanded an implacable show of strength. The Confessor must know that we are not defenseless, said the Robot, watching as their armies took shape, growing ever stronger and more prepared for the conflict. We do not seek war, but if he starts it, we will not hesitate to respond with equal fury. The Warlock, with his vast experience in political manipulation, added, "We must move in the shadows. We cannot reveal our hand yet. If the Confessor learns of this base, we are doomed. War will be inevitable. Our only option is to remain hidden, prepare, and, when the time comes, show Yuggoth who truly holds the power." With the construction of the new base underway and the plan to match the Confessor's destructive power in motion, the Sorcerer and the Robot faced an uncertain future. But they knew that their alliance, no matter how strong, was built on the foundations of political trust. Both were calculating leaders, and though they shared a common enemy, they also knew that once that enemy was eliminated, they could become rivals. The Confessor, meanwhile, continued consolidating his power alongside his co-regent, the Spectre, who had remained entirely silent and reluctant to comment on the growing political upheaval in the Assembly of the Four Crowns, unaware that his former allies were weaving a web of intrigue that would eventually challenge them. The power in Yuggoth was shifting, but everyone knew that the equilibrium was as fragile as a thin layer of ice over a lake of fire. And so, in the shadows of the Nether and in the hidden walls of the Eternal Flint, the fate of Yuggoth was being forged. The entire world stood on the brink of a war that would not only define the boundaries of the empires, but also the destiny of all of its inhabitants. The last unified Imperial Front. In the vast lands of Yuggoth, the fate of all great empires hung by a delicate thread of broken alliances, hidden betrayals, and imminent war threats. The Warlock, the Robot, and the Confessor, the most powerful figures in the world, found themselves at a critical juncture. Political tensions between them had reached their peak, and the shadows of distrust loomed over their every move. However, amidst these tensions, one thing united them: their insatiable pursuit of power and the treasures that the end and its mysteries could grant. Despite the growing friction, the three rulers set aside their intrigues to face a common goal, one that had brought them together in the past: the Ender Dragon. The ancient creature, a symbol of destruction and rebirth, had fallen under their weapons once before, but the empires needed more: dragon's breath, an alchemical ingredient of immense value. It had the potential to shift the balance of power. The three knew that whoever controlled it and its secrets would control the wars to come. An ancient ritual, newly discovered by the recently ascended order of scholars from the royal library, promised the resurrection of the dragon, offering the possibility of capturing some of the mana that emanated from its magical fire. Armed and prepared, the three emperors ventured once more into the end. Tension was palpable, not just from the danger of the beast that they were about to face, but from the furtive glances and heavy silences that they shared. The Warlock and the Robot, though still allied in certain aspects, knew that their true enemy was closer than it seemed. Their fragile hope was that this common endeavor might curb the destructive urges of the Confessor, whose erratic and violent behavior threatened to unleash an unprecedented war. When the ritual was completed and the dragon was resurrected, its roar shook the skies. For a brief moment, the three rulers set aside their differences and, as in the times past, they fought side by side. The Sorcerer unleashed his arcane spells, the Robot deployed his mechanical ingenuity, and the Confessor, in a frenzy of controlled violence, struck lethal blows with his enchanted maze. The dragon, though fearsome, was no match for the combined power of all three emperors. It fell quickly, and its breath trapped in enchanted flasks. Yet another resource for their future ambitions. Yet, despite their success, tensions did not disappear. The Robot and the Warlock exchanged glances filled with concern. The alliance with the Confessor was becoming increasingly volatile. They had hoped that the common battle against the dragon might soothe his thirst for violence, but upon seeing the savage satisfaction in their allies' eyes, they knew that peace was only temporary. Deep down, they both understood that true conflict was still to come. After the victory in the end, the three emperors decided to embark on a new joint mission: the Trial Chambers of Primus, a legendary arena where the bravest warriors faced endless waves of enemies to earn rewards worthy of the gods. The Warlock and the Robot knew they needed more than just resources. They sought a rare object: the Heavy Core, a relic of incalculable power that could shift the balance of power amongst the three empires. They fought for hours against hordes of abominable creatures, once again proving their skill and mastery on the battlefield. However, the chamber was not generous. After exhausting all their strength, they failed to obtain the coveted core. The Warlock and the Robot were visibly frustrated, but the Confessor, ever unpredictable, seemed to revel in the chaos and combat. Unconcerned with the rewards that slipped through his companions' fingers, he already held the legendary maze in his hands. Despite the failure in the chamber, their plans continued. The Confessor and the Warlock, still bound by a fragile alliance, set off together on a new adventure. Destiny would lead them into the depths of the Great Tunnel. The Great Tunnel was a massive architectural feat where the Warlock enslaved three different withers, and with their destructive nature and strength, used them to carve a massive tunnel in the deepest levels of Yuggoth's core. This tunnel revealed secrets far older than the Emperor's intrigues. Two ancient cities, lost to time, both laying in the darkness, filled with treasures and unknown dangers. Their relationship was fragile, but both knew that within those cities they might find something more valuable than any wealth: the last legendary smithing template, an artifact capable of forging weapons and armor of unparalleled power and beauty. If they found it, control over future conflicts would be in their hands. They entered the ancient cities cautiously. The historical codices of Yuggoth had detailed the events of the first and second catastrophes, and of course, the existence of the feared wardens, unfathomable creatures that guarded the deepest secrets of these places, and those legends were true. They faced wave after wave of these silent colossi, whose suffocating presence could make even the bravest tremble. Yet once again, the emperors proved their ability to work together when the situation demanded it. The Confessor, though consumed by rage, was an unmatched warrior. The Warlock, with his relentless magic, was key in defeating the Guardians. Despite their efforts, the legendary smithing template they sought was nowhere to be found. The failure was a hard blow for both. The riches of the ancient cities were not enough to satisfy the ambitions of the two emperors, who knew that the future depended on something far greater than gold or diamonds. However, the most unexpected success was that for the first time in a long while, they had had managed to act as a unified front. The adventure in the ancient cities had temporarily reinforced the fragile alliance between the Warlock and the Confessor, but peace was as unstable as Yuggoth's as politics itself. As they returned to their empires, laden with treasures of the cities, they knew that the true test was still to come. The Confessor, always on the brink of betrayal, continued to harbor his dark plans, and the Warlock, despite his efforts to control him, sensed that chaos was only a breath away. The Heavy Cause and the Last Smithing Template. The realms of Yuggoth stood at a critical point, with fragile alliances and a looming conflict threatening to engulf the world in a war of unimaginable proportions. Three emperors, the Warlock, the Robot, and the Confessor, vied not only for political control, but also for dominion over the world's most ancient and powerful forces. However, the balance had tipped in favor of the Confessor, thanks to a weapon of immense power, a great enchanted hammer, forged with a heavy core, whose devastating strength had been demonstrated when yielded against the legendary End Dragon. For the Warlock and the Robot, witnessing the Confessor's mastery in battle made one thing clear. Without an immediate and effective weapon, the Confessor's dominion over Yuggoth would become absolute. Both knew that the Heavy Core, a rare and highly coveted relic, was the key to leveling the battlefield. They could not allow the Clan of the Dark Skulls, a faction devoted to chaos and destruction, with access to a vast arsenal of Wither Skulls, to become an unstoppable threat. Thus, the two emperors made a secret pact. They understood that only by obtaining their own Heavy Cores could they prevent the absolute dominion of a single empire. The journey to obtain the Heavy Cores was not a simple task. The trial chambers of primers, an underground labyrinth filled with deadly traps and legendary creatures, were among the most perilous challenges in the world. Only those bold or desperate enough dared to venture into its depths. Legends spoke of relics of ancient power hidden within, but few survived to confirm their existence. The Warlock and the Robot, however, had no choice. They knew that every day without a core left them at a disadvantage against the Confessor and his growing influence. With determination and combined resources, they embarked on a mission of no return. 2 long months, the emperors navigated the endless corridors of the chambers, battling indescribable creatures and overcoming traps seemingly designed to obliterate those ambitious enough to seek them. Each defeat was a reminder of the price of their endeavor, but every small victory brought them closer to their ultimate goal. Finally, after arduous exploration, both found what they have been searching for: 2 Heavy Cores, hidden in the deepest and most dangerous chamber they have ever faced. With these cores in hand, they knew that the next step would be to forge the legendary hammer, but at the same time, they understood that the most important thing was ensuring that the day to use them never came. The process of forging the hammer with a heavy core was almost as perilous as the search for the core itself. Imperial smiths teetered on the brink of despair as they worked on the material under the watchful eyes of the Warlock and the Robot. Legends spoke of smiths consumed by the arcane energy of the core, transformed into beasts by their inability to control its power. However, success was within reach, and when both emperors finally held their enchanted hammers, the balance of power had shifted. Yet, the feeling of victory was not complete. Though they now wielded the most powerful weapons ever forged, the Warlock and the Robot knew that the true power lay not only in brute strength, but in the ability to control its use. With their new weapons in hand, the only question remaining was when, or if they would ever have to use it against the Confessor, a man who seemed to be losing the last traces of his humanity. While the Warlock and the Robot sought to strengthen their positions, the Confessor was not idle. Deep within his empire, his mind has discovered a new ancient city, untouched and brimming with forgotten treasure. The ancient cities of Yuggoth were legendary not only for the resources they hosted, but for the secrets of a lost civilization that had once mastered the art of forging. Within this lost city, the Confessor found something no one expected to exist: the second smithing template of the ancient cities. With this relic in his possession, the Confessor had completed the imperial collection of templates, granting him the ability to forge weapons and armor that surpassed anything ever seen in the realms of Yuggoth. The discovery, though powerful in nature, left him at a dangerous crossroads. For the first time in a long while, the Confessor found himself in a position where all he could do was wait. With his enchanted armor and the templates under his control, his power was nearly absolute. But time is the greatest enemy of those who crave action. And while his allies and enemies grew stronger, patience was not a virtue that the Confessor wielded easily. The 3 emperors of Yuggoth, with their legendary weapons and unspoken secrets, stood at the point of no return. Though for now, swords remained sheathed and enchanted hammers rested in their forges. All knew that the balance was more fragile than ever. Tensions between the Confessor, the Warlock, and the Robot continued to grow, and the threat of the Dark Skulls loomed over them like an unrelenting shadow. The days of peace were numbered. With every discovery and every weapon forged, conflict seemed inevitable. The Warlock and the Robot, though prepared for battle, still prayed that the day that they would have to wield their hammers would never come. But deep in their hearts, they both knew that the Confessor, with his growing impatience and collection of templates, would not wait much longer before unleashing his own war. And so, as the forces of fate converged, the empires of Yuggoth marched towards the abyss. The heavy cores, the enchanted hammers, and the smithing templates were merely pieces on a much larger board. A board where the players were willing to sacrifice everything for absolute power, even if it meant the total destruction of the world they had fought so hard to dominate. The Great War. The lands of Yuggoth had been forged in chaos and ambition. Every corner of the world, every fortress, and every kingdom bore witness to the eternal struggle between betrayal and power. The emperors who ruled over this vast land lived under the shadow of secret alliances, silent conspiracies, and looming threats. It was a time of distrust, where the slightest whisper in the halls of courts could bring down an empire. In this dark landscape, two figures emerged from the depths of the most sinister of politics, the robot and the warlock. Both emperors shared an alliance that went beyond what was visible, a pact sealed in the shadows, far away from public scrutiny. However, the nature of their relationship was as volatile as the world they inhabited. The Wither Skeleton Farm, hidden deep within the clan of the Dark Skulls, represented a vital resource in this equation of power. It was here where the true battle began. Not in open warfare, but in silence, far from weapons and armies. The robot, a cold and calculating figure, had devised a meticulous plan. To him, politics was nothing more than a game of patience, and his moves were calculated down to the finest detail. Day after day, he collected Wither skulls in an unrelenting effort, amassing an arsenal of 130 skulls. For the robot, this was a simple mathematical equation. Gather what was needed to match the power of the Confessor, who had boasted in court of his own arsenal of 250 skulls. With each skull, the robot's military strength grew, but always in the cold detachment of an emperor who preferred preparation over confrontation. The warlock, on the other hand, did not share the same patience. Desperate over the Confessor's constant threats and violent acts, his mind had plunged into paranoia and fury. His anger burned like scorching fire, consuming his judgment. While the robot calculated, the Sorcerer paced in and out of the skeleton farm with growing anxiety, accumulating skulls endlessly. For him, no number was ever enough. The Spectre, the Confessor, and their arsenal of destruction kept him awake until he had finally gathered nearly 400 skulls, a number that even he could not fully comprehend. The tragic turning point came when, driven by desperation and thirst for vengeance, the Sorcerer destroyed the spawner, the very heart of the Wither Skeleton Farm. This act not only sealed the fate of the clan of the Dark Skulls, but also marked a before and after in the fragile peace that had kept Yuggoth in balance. To the Warlock, this was justice, but the world around them would not see it the same way. Upon receiving the news, the robot remained unmoved. While his alliance with the Warlock was strategic, his feelings about this act were more complex. He did not share his companion's emotional fervor. To him, the destruction of the spawner was not an act of justice, but an unnecessary provocation. However, in his calculating nature, he neither reprimanded nor condemned the Warlock, choosing neutrality instead. This would be the first step towards distancing himself from the war alliance they had secretly forged. But the echoes of conflict were swift. The Spectre, commander and guardian of the clan of the Dark Skulls, issued a proclamation to all courts and assemblies of Yuggoth. The message was clear. Whoever had desecrated the sacred farm must reveal themselves before midnight, or the consequences would be devastating. The threat was not an empty one. The Wither skulls, until then kept in storage, would be unleashed as a storm of death upon the realms of Yuggoth. Tension was thick in the air. The emperors of each kingdom mobilized, fearing the consequences of an all-out war. The Confessor, already known for his violent outbursts and uncontrollable rage, prepared to unleash his vengeance. Meanwhile, the robot fortified his lands, preparing defenses against possible attacks. For him, protecting his monuments were the highest priority, even if it meant offering no direct support to his former ally. The Eternal Flint now stood without allies, mere hours before midnight, and its emperor was unaware. Yuggoth's political landscape had never been so fragile. In the dark halls of the courts, whispers grew louder. Would the robot reveal his truth to save his empire, thus betraying the Warlock? Or would he maintain his silence, allowing the flames of war to consume the world they had both sworn to protect? The Assembly of the Four Crowns held its breath, waiting for one of the two emperors to break the silence. The lands of Yuggoth, once a vast and prosperous domain of powerful empires, now stood on the brink of the abyss. Dark skies and perpetual mist foreshadowed war, while rumors of betrayal and conspiracy spread like poison amongst the noble houses. Among these rumors, one stood out above all others. The destruction of the clan of the Dark Skulls farm was an act that had provoked the wrath of the feared Confessor and and his war companion, the Spectre. This was no mere offense, but a spark that could ignite a war of devastating proportions. The Warlock, one of Yugoth's most ancient and enigmatic monarchs, watched from the shadows as the gears of conflict began to turn. There was no time for diplomacy or traditional alliances. He knew the storm could not be avoided, and soon the empires would descend into chaos. In his secret stronghold, hidden beneath the barren lands and protected by ancient spells, the Warlock began to empty his most valuable treasures. Enchanted chests filled with netherite armor, his arsenal of netherite weapons, tools, diamond gear, precious stones, and rare metals. Each of these resources, accumulated over centuries, was now carefully stored in magical chests. These chests, a secret known only to the most powerful of sorcerers, possessed the unique ability to be stacked within an ender chest. An artifact even rarer than the chests themselves, was mystically and irrevocably bound to its bearer, ensuring that no one else could access its contents. The four empires were known for distributing their lands through these magical and powerful chests. The Warlock, unshaken, carried out his task without haste, but with a cold certainty. He knew that the power of the Clan of the Dark Skulls was unstoppable and that would be ravaged sooner or later. However, these thoughts did not trouble him. The only thing that mattered to him was securing his resources for the war he knew was coming. A war not only for vengeance, but for the survival of his legacy. In the distance, a new threat emerged. The Sun, a figure once allied with the robot, had resurfaced from his mysterious exile. Drawn by the rumors of an imminent war that could alter the balance of Yuggoth, he decided to seek out his former companion, the robot. However, upon seeing the Confessor and the Spectres' maneuvers, the Sun realized that this war was not a simple struggle for power. It was a battle against forces that threatened to destabilize everything the Assembly of the Four Crowns had built, and so he set out on a path to reunite with the robot, knowing that the old allies had to stand together once more or fall before the rising chaos. As the 0 hour approached, the Warlock was summoned by the Sorcerer to a clandestine meeting. With only 3 hours until the dawn of war, they met in the throne room of Falconia's grand castle. The Sorcerer, usually calculating and reserved, appeared restless. He wanted to know the truth about the attack on the farm of the Clan of the Dark Skulls, suspecting that the Warlock had played a much darker role than he was willing to admit. The Confessor is burning with rage, the Sorcerer said, his voice echoing through the stone hall, and he won't stop until he has destroyed everything in his path. War is inevitable, but if we are to fight together, I need the truth. The Warlock, his face shadowed by the flickering torchlight, remained silent for a short moment. He knew that hiding the truth would only cost him his most valuable ally in a battle that promised to be brutal, but something weighed heavier on his mind. Just hours before midnight, the robot, his oldest and most powerful ally, had remained completely silent, and the united front they had pledged seemed to have vanished with the very halls where their pact had been made. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he confessed. He admitted that he had been the one to destroy the clans' farm, knowing that the Eternal Flint was the only empire capable of standing against them, and that this act would provoke the Dark Skulls into war. Unleashing the conflict, the Warlock deemed necessary to dismantle their growing power. He also confessed that a strong, subjective moral obligation had driven his attack. He truly believed that the atrocities committed by the Confessor, as well as his erratic and violent nature, had to be punished and suppressed by a higher moral force. But I am not defenseless, he said in an icy tone, boasting his vast arsenal of wither skulls. 20, 50, 100 withers if necessary. I can reduce their lands to ashes before they move a single soldier. The Sorcerer, though impressed, he knew that the destruction the Warlock proposed would not come without a price. However, the threat of the Confessor was too great to ignore. In the end, the two emperors swore to fight together against the Clan of the Dark Skulls, knowing that any other course of action meant their annihilation. The Warlock wasted no time. He knew his window to act was limited. With only 5 minutes before midnight, he flew at full speed towards the heart of the Clan of the Dark Skulls' empire, which had been temporarily abandoned by its monarchs as they traveled to Imperial Parliament to demand justice at the People's Judicial House, or, failing that, to declare war and begin the destruction of the sanctuary. Taking advantage of their absence, the Warlock landed on the coast and began his devastating attack. He summoned more than 20 withers in the most strategic areas of the empire, and within minutes, chaos reigned. The skies darkened as the destructive creatures unleashed their fury upon the clans' fields, villages, fortresses, castles, towers, and towns. The Warlock continued its vengeance, targeting the royal library and the monarch's castle. With meticulous precision, he planted massive amounts of dynamite, obliterating both landmark buildings in an explosion that echoed across the empire. The end of the Dark Skulls was assured. Meanwhile, the Hound, the Sorcerer, the Robot, the Spectre, and the Confessor, still at Parliament, heard the news of the attack. It became evident that the perpetrator had revealed himself. The Warlock had acted without remorse. The Confessor and the Spectre immediately flew towards the devastated empire to contain the damage. But as the Warlock saw his enemies approaching, he unleashed one last wither before fleeing. Propelled by a torrent of fireworks, he soared at blistering speeds, but the Confessor was not far behind. With a tracking map in hand, the Confessor was determined to not let his enemy escape. The chase continued for hundreds of miles, with the Confessor always a step behind the Warlock. Finally, the Warlock reached a dense tropical jungle, where he frantically dug underground. Though the Confessor had pursued him to the ends of the world, he could not find him. Cursing the sky, he eventually abandoned the search and returned to his empire. The Warlock, hidden deep below, knew he had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Tensions between the empires of Yuggoth remained at a breaking point, and the next move by the Warlock, the Confessor, or the Spectre could decide the fate of Yuggoth. The devastation looming over Yuggoth was not merely the echo of old battles or minor border skirmishes. What was unfolding was a political and military cataclysm, a macabre dance between empires that controlled the destiny of the vast and shadowy region. In the midst of this storm, the clan of the Dark Skulls, once one of the most feared and respected strongholds, teetered on the brink of extinction. When the Warlock unleashed his arsenal of withers upon the heart of the clan of the Dark Skulls, he expected an unprecedented wave of destruction, a force devastating enough to dismantle the clan's power within hours. However, reality was less apocalyptic. The withers, creatures of immense power, proved less effective than promised. Instead of unleashing total annihilation, many simply wandered through the skies, launching scattered attacks that barely left scars on the empire's most imposing monuments. The creatures' ranged attacks were ineffective, failing to topple structures built to withstand centuries of conflict. The Spectre and the Confessor, the two emperors of the clan of the Dark Skulls, quickly reacted. Despite the initial chaos, with a cold and calculated precision, they began clearing their lands, confronting the withers one by one, eliminating those closest to the ground, and restoring fragile control over their ravaged nation. It was not a complete victory. Many areas remained destroyed or guarded by rogue withers, and the skies remained plagued with threats, but at least they had contained the immediate devastation. Once they deemed their task sufficiently advanced, the two emperors wasted no time. They knew that war could not be limited to a defensive response. Consumed by a singular desire for justice and the destruction of his skeleton farm, the Spectre paid close attention to the order and timing of all of the emperors' arrival at the Union Congress. All the emperors, eager to witness the Imperial Parliament's outcome, had arrived hours early at the sanctuary of the Pilgrims. However, along with the Warlock's notorious absence, the Sorcerer had arrived much later than the others. Drowning in suspicion and a latent desire for vengeance, after listening to the Spectre's speculative about the Sorcerer's mysterious delay, the Confessor immediately decided that the Sorcerer must have met with the Warlock before Parliament. Determined to sever any possible coalition against them, the Confessor and the Spectre flew to Falconia, seeking answers or blood. Upon arriving in Falconia, the situation was tense. The Sorcerer, usually proud and defiant, was unusually submissive after following the Emperors armed to the teeth. He knew his empire could not withstand direct confrontation. Though Falconia was a kingdom of wealth and power, it was clearly outnumbered and outmatched in weaponry. The colder demeanor of the Confessor and the relentless presence of the Spectre made it evident that if battle broke out, it would be swift and brutal. Faced with such a display of strength, the Sorcerer offered no resistance. Forced into parley in his own throne room, the Sorcerer endured the harsh interrogations of the Confessor, who accused him of conspiring with the Warlock. The Confessor, known for his brutality and lack of mercy, sought no diplomacy, but justice justice according to his own twisted concept. He charged the Sorcerer with treason and war crimes, demanding he reveal every detail of his military alliance with the Warlock. But the Sorcerer, cold and calculating, denied all accusations. He knew that, regardless of the truth, admitting to any alliance would seal his fate. Though the Sorcerer's words were skillful, they were not enough to satisfy his executioner's thirst for vengeance. Without further ado, the Confessor executed him upon his own throne, an execution that was neither the first nor the last. Every time the Sorcerer revived, he was killed again, over and over, until the Spectre and the Confessor deemed his punishment complete. Their vengeance resonated not only in the physical realm, but in the very depths of the Sorcerer's soul. The message was clear. Any support for the Warlock would be paid in blood. Before leaving Falconia, the two emperors did not settle with merely executing the monarch. In a final act of humiliation, they destroyed Falconia's treasury chamber, detonating its accumulated riches as a last reminder of their power and their willingness to annihilate everyone in their way. The next destination was the Empire of the Robot, a kingdom that had so far remained neutral in the conflict. Upon arrival, both the Sun and the Robot received them with evident apprehension. Though they had avoided involvement in the war, they knew that merely being seen as potential enemies could be enough to attract the wrath of the Clan of the Dark Skulls. Prepared for battle, the Sun and the Robot armed themselves to the teeth, fearing a fate similar to that of the Sorcerer. The Spectre and the Confessor, however, displayed a surprisingly different attitude. They had no intention of attacking an empire that had remained on the sidelines, yet their mere presence, along with constant insinuations about the supposed weaknesses of the Sun and the Robot, exerted suffocating pressure on the two neutral rulers. "Why so nervous?" the Spectre asked with unsettling coldness, while the Confessor grinned menacingly. "We have no plans to unleash withers here, for now." Satisfied with instilling fear without resorting to violence, the two emperors left the Empire of the Robot without causing destruction. Their true objective laid on the other side of Yuggoth, the Warlock's secret base. Meanwhile, hidden in his underground hideout, the Warlock had made a fatal mistake. In his frenzy of preparations and destruction, he had forgotten to stock up on vital supplies for his escape, fireworks, and a compass. Without them, his ability to fly and flee was severely limited. Though he had few rockets left, he knew that they wouldn't be enough for the long journey ahead. Urgently, he sought iron and redstone to craft a compass and find his way back to the battlefield. His flight took him across the frozen peaks of Akara, where, to his surprise, he encountered his mortal enemies, the Confessor and the Spectre, who were heading to his base. In a fit of rage and recklessness, the Warlock dove towards them, hurling insults and war cries at the Emperors. The Spectre, unfazed, observed in silence, while the Confessor, known for his explosive temper, could not resist the provocation. An aerial chase ensued, with the Confessor and the Warlock exchanging shouts and curses in the skies of Yuggoth. However, after a long and exhausting pursuit, Confessor abandoned the fight, rejoining the Spectre to continue their true objective, the destruction of the Warlock's secret base. When they arrived, the two emperors showed no mercy. They unleashed their full might upon the underground fortress, reducing everything in their path to rubble. The ground trembled and the structures crumbled, leaving only decorative obsidian reliefs, silent symbols of the grandeur that once inhabited those dark corridors. Simultaneously, the Warlock, having barely escaped the Confessor's wrath, seized the opportunity to return to the ruins of the Clan of the Dark Skulls. Once again, he unleashed chaos in the form of withers and dynamite, destroying what little remained of what was once an imposing empire. Across the shattered fields of the Clan of the Dark Skulls, where the ruins of fallen fortresses and the shadows of a decaying empire stretched as far as the eye could see, the Warlock returned, once more unleashing the chaos that loomed over that dying land. The withers, those flying abominations, spiraled above the devastated lands, while dynamite echoed through the forgotten halls, destroying what little remained standing. The empire of the Clan of the Dark Skulls, once a symbol of strength and dominance, now succumbed to the relentless waves of destruction. The Warlock, with his signature calculated coldness, knew that each explosion and each summoned creature was not just a military victory, but a message to his enemies. Not even their remains would find peace. Far from the howls of devastation, the Sun and the Robot silently watched the annihilation of the clan. Both had flown there, drawn by curiosity and the need to understand the horrors the war had unleashed. Both both knew the fate of the Dark Skulls was a warning to all empires. As they observed the destruction unfold, a dark realization gripped them. No empire was truly safe. Destruction seemed to be the only inevitable end for all. When the last towers of the clan collapsed, the sun and the robot retreated in silence, carrying with them the image of an empire crumbling before their eyes. Though they knew their neutrality had kept them safe thus far, deep down they understood that they were walking on the edge of a knife, and that the conflict consuming Yuggoth could drag them in at any moment. The Warlock, meanwhile, after sowing chaos, vanished once more, escaping to the farthest reaches of Yuggoth. He knew his time in the war was nearing its end. He had destroyed, betrayed, and defied his enemies at every turn, but now, with no more options, he resigned himself to waiting for the conflict to burn out, leaving him only as an echo in history. On the other side of the continent, the emperors of the clan of the Dark Skulls, the Confessor and the Spectre, returned to their lands, facing an almost impossible task: restoring what little remained of their empire. As they cleaned up the wreckage left by the Warlocks' devastation, their determination was unshakable. They knew their enemies still lurked, and that time was against them. But instead of surrendering, their minds clung to a single goal: vengeance. Once the restoration work was complete, the two emperors set their sights on the empire of the robot. They knew that although the sun and the robot had remained on the sidelines, their neutrality was no longer an option. With a mix of diplomacy and threat, they pressured both emperors to accompany them to the Eternal Flint, the empire of the former ally, to force its destruction. It was a test of loyalty, a macabre display of power and domination. However, both the sun and the robot resisted actively on participating in the destruction, demanding to be mere spectators of what was about to unfold. With the sun and the robot as silent witnesses, the Confessor and the Spectre unleashed their fury upon the Eternal Flint. The destruction was methodical, calculated, and relentless. Yet, amidst the chaos, the sun could not remain idle. In a desperate act of humanity, he attempted to save 10 village children who were trapped in a deadly dynamite trap. With a sense of urgency, he destroyed the chain of explosives before they could detonate. This act of compassion ignited the uncontainable wrath of the Confessor, who, blinded by fury, brutally attacked the sun. Amidst the violence, the sun escaped, flying towards the distant ruins of the immense obelisk. But his return led him once again to an unchained Confessor, who, stripped of all humanity, coldly murdered him. With the sun's corpse at his feet, the Confessor claimed his gear and weaponry, sealing his fate. The robot, upon witnessing the fall of his co-emperor, immediately flew back to his empire, fully aware that the Confessor's next target would be his home. The Confessor arrived soon after, but was met by a determined robot. In a desperate attempt to prevent further conflict, the robot offered the Confessor forgiveness, demanding only to return the son's stolen gear, but the Confessor, hardened by betrayal and madness, remained unmoved. With no resolution in sight, the newly resurrected sun proposed a solution: a duel to the death. No weapons, no armor, bare knuckle combat. A duel that would restore honor and put an end to the conflict once and for all. After a brief moment of consideration, the robot accepted the challenge. Surprisingly, so did the Confessor. As the robot prepared, removing his weaponry inside his fortress, the Confessor revealed his final betrayal. He had filled the robot's base with dynamite while it was left unguarded, and in an instant of treachery, he detonated it, burying the robot under rubble and fire. Trust had been betrayed once again, and the robot joined the long list of victims claimed by the Great War. When the robot returned to life, he found his empire in ruins, his home destroyed, his crops reduced to ashes, and amidst the chaos, the Confessor, standing still, his gaze lost and his breathing heavy. The robot approached slowly, filled with disbelief and restrained fury. "Was it worth it?" he whispered, his voice heavy with pain. The Confessor, after a long silence, finally answered, "The world is cursed. Its empires are cursed. The very land that saw us arrive has seen us fall. But now it is time to end everything. The beast's desire is to begin anew, to create a new world." Convinced that the world of Yugoth was doomed, the robot, consumed by despair, accompanied the Confessor in his final act. Together, they made their way into the heart of the sanctuary of the Pilgrims, where, after breaking the rock beneath them, they revealed a hidden cavern, vast and filled with an ancient and mystical aura. At the center of the cavern stood a monument of magma, a tribute to Primus, the creative god of Yugoth. There, before the monument, the Confessor left his exhausted body collapse under his own sword. His blood flowed, and the earth began to tremble. The monument's roots absorbed his life, and the cave collapsed, burying both emperors beneath tons of rock. And so, in the collapse of the earth, the Confessor and the robot found what they believed would be their final rest, convinced that this time they would not return to life, and that the world of Yugoth would be destroyed. Thank you all for watching the narrated documentary of the story of the Assembly of the Four Crowns. All four empires, the Eternal Flint, the Clan of the Dark Skulls, Falconia, and the Empire of the Robot, were constructed in survival mode. The entire server was played in survival mode. The only thing created in creative mode by the Sorcerer before the arrival of the Seven was the Sanctuary of the Pilgrims. After the Great War, all players deserted the server. The Empire of the Robot was abandoned and never restored. The Clan of the Dark Skulls was abandoned as well and never restored. The Warlock worked tirelessly in building more monuments and expanding the Eternal Flint, turning it into a very eccentric, vast and grand empire. The Sorcerer, on the other hand, also worked on the castle of Falconia, building a new village, houses, and the overall aesthetics of the Empire of Falconia. Thank you all so much for watching, and long live the Assembly of the Four Crowns.